And we'll talk about that mural you've got at the background there too later on. Well, I think we've got enough people to kind of start, and people are going to be looking back on these anyway later, hopefully, if they're interested. So we'll begin. Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A, where we're welcoming today Dr. Norm Young. Hey, Norm.
G'day, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm very good. It's good to see you. We seem to randomly bump into each other around Cooranbong or Bunnings or takeaways or Coles, don't we?
Well, not at the moment. I'm fairly happy.
Prior to the isolation.
Yes, indeed.
So it's nice to kind of bump into you here on Zoom and to have a chat. It's the 40th anniversary of Glacier View, and some people celebrate the anniversary and some people wish it was forgotten. But you were quite involved with Glacier View. For people that have that are young people and kind of have heard ruminations and hushed tones spoken about it and don't really know what it is, can you just give a quick summary of what is Glacier View? What was the event Glacier View? And then we'll talk about leading up to it and post Glacier View.
Well, it was triggered by a forum presentation in October 1979 by Dr. Desmond Ford, in which he presented some of the problems with our investigative judgment and sanctuary doctrine. I never heard him so frank before and so open about all the problems, and I initially was quite shocked and actually wrote to him telling him, oh, boy, you really let it rip. But years later, when I read the script again, I kind of quite amazed that I was admonished him at all. It's
interesting.
But at the time, I think I've never heard Des so open about the problems. The problems were not new to me, but because I was taught by Des, and he did ventilate some of them with us, and some of them we discovered just by reading our Bibles. But Neil Wilson, who was the GC president at the time, he thought the way to handle this was give Des 6 months study leave, which he did, I think, in Washington, D.C., and produced quite a hefty manuscript that went through about 6 points and really reflected the problems he raised in the forum. That is the Adventist Forum. That was where it was in PUC in the USA. I think Wilson made a huge mistake by doing that, personally, on reflection. At the time, of course, this kind of thing at this level of the church I was totally naive about it all. The ramifications and the machinations and all the rest of the politics. I was like a lamb to the slaughter in some ways, but I mercifully was not the lamb. Des was, and I think he was probably about as naive as I was. In that time, in that 6 months he had, and he wrote this huge manuscript, it really something that could have been handled, I think. It's like the boy in the dike. The earlier you plug the hole, the better. So the earlier that they talked to Des would have been better. But having this great gathering, because they've gathered at Glacier View in Colorado, very nice spot, mind you, a youth camp, and the facilities where we could sleep. I forget how many, but over 100 academics and administrators there, and we divided up into small groups. I was in group 4, and the questions that we were given to discuss in these small groups were ones that were related to Des's manuscript. And then we gave a report from each one of the groups, and then that came together to the whole group in plenary meeting, I guess, all together in the one meeting. Heard the different groups what they said. Do you need more?
No, that's good. Because I want to go on with that, but that's a good summation of what happened. Was so Neil asked Des to write after the October forum. Neil Wilson asked Des to write his thoughts down on paper, and that was when that 1,000-page book came out. Is that right?
Yes, he was given 6 months.
Right.
And 6 months for Des, he's very productive.
Yeah.
And then he researched it. He did a lot of research and put it all together, and it was a pretty impressive piece of work at the end of it.
Yeah. It's often said that not many people there read it. Did you read it?
I certainly did. I had to wear glasses when I came back, so I put reading that manuscript. Unfortunately, the manuscript that I read was borrowed to reproduce the manuscript so people could get hold of it. And I don't know how they reproduced it, but it went down to a printing press and I guess they scanned it or something. And they got ruined in the process. So I got one of the new printed version, but the one which I'd written notes in, and I read it through, all gone.
Boy, that would have been a valuable document for you to hold up today if you'd had it.
Yeah, well, I have the one that they did in 3 separate volumes, but the one I had, yeah.
So how much time after that?
Yes, I definitely did read it. It did take quite a while to read.
And after that 6 months that he'd put that together, how much time was there before that and Glacier View? How much time did you have to kind of read the draft of the manuscript?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't recall exactly, but I can remember my wife and 2 children were in Sweden at the time, and we had just moved into a new home. And I had a little study. I can remember sitting in that study for several weeks. So certainly several weeks, maybe a month. I'm just not sure.
Okay.
It was August yes, it was August that Glacier View met. And certainly I had the manuscript in July, and I can assure you. So yeah, I'd say a month.
Mm. Okay, so before we come now, we're going to come back to Glacier View and some other things surrounding it. But I just wanted to back up a little bit. Were you born a Seventh-day Adventist?
No.
What age did you become an Adventist?
I would have been 23.
Was it because family or girlfriend, or because you were convinced by the doctrinal presentation that someone gave you?
I was in business, and my business partner was going seriously with a Catholic girl. He was, like me, just a secular Oz, though he had attended the Church of Christ, but that was because he was on their basketball side, and attendance was part of the qualifications for that. So he wasn't religious, and I wasn't religious. But his girlfriend he was going with was Catholic faith. And we grabbed one of the guys we did work for who was an Adventist. We used to machine his axles for his trailers that he built and sold. And we asked him, and he invited us to an evening meeting. You can't do it, on the job, so to speak. And we ended up in an evangelist's home. We didn't know that. And the first question he asked us, well, do we believe the Bible? And we said, well, of course not. And said, why not? I'm not sure of the 3 reasons. I remember there were 3. But my guess would be the virgin birth, Noah's flood, and Adam and Eve story.
That's what you offered up.
Yeah, but that would have been some help. I doubt that I don't know whether I knew about Noah's flood story or not. My biblical knowledge was very, very limited. I did do scripture sometimes. It was voluntary at public school. As a public school, I did do the scripture. Whether they ever talked about Noah's flood, I have no idea. I know that I do remember the Good Samaritan story, but I used to get it mixed up with the Simpson and the donkey story from the First World War. There is a certain parallel. So when I had my first Bible studies, it was by page numbers. And, Old Testament is in the front, New Testament's at the back, sort of thing. I still find that helpful, unless you've got the Bible upside down. There would have been some help from my mate who did know a bit more Bible knowledge, but I'd certainly knew about Adam and Eve, and I'm pretty sure I knew about the virgin birth and found that, quite a myth, So they were our reasons. And at the end of that meeting with this evangelist, who didn't tell us he was an evangelist, he said, will you lads come back? We were both in our 20s. And we were too embarrassed to say, no way, Jose. And so we came back. And it gradually led into biblical studies and history. And I was always interested in history. And ultimately, you are confronted with the demands of Christ. And I remember the evangelist saying one night, when he had said to his wife, I learned later, he had said to his wife, we're not going to get either of these two guys. But he said, as we sat down in the lounge, he said, the time to respond to the call of God is not when you say we're ready, but when God calls you, not when you call God. That hit me like a sledgehammer, because that's just what we were doing. We were both pursuing wealth and successful business, etc., etc. And we wanted, when we had our flash car and a big house and a yacht on the Swan River in Perth, then we might. And we used to say, when we see the Sunday laws, we'll join. And that sort of attitude. So when he said that, when God calls you, not when you call God, on the way home that night, I said to my business partner, I'm going to become an Adventist.
Wow.
And he pulled over and he said, do you mean not work on Saturday, which we did? And I said, yes. And he said, it won't make any difference to your wages. But he said, the factory will still stay open. And I said, fair enough. And then he said, my only word to you is, if you join this, that you stay with it and not just a flash in the pan. And he himself, of course, stopped attending the Bible studies after that.
So he wasn't convinced.
No, he wasn't. He was a very clever man, and he liked argument, and he was very good at it. And he loved getting a Baptist or something like that and getting stuck into them over the law and the Sabbath. And he knew the text and he could use them very, very cleverly. But when I came back because I went to college, 5 months after becoming an Adventist, and I went back with a lot more conviction that the center of Christianity is actually Christ and not the law and not the Sabbath. And he starts in on that. And I said, no, that's not what it's all about, Steve. It's all about the mercy of God revealed in the death and resurrection of Christ for the forgiveness of sins. And that was too close to the bone and he never raised the question of religion again.
Mm. How you just phrased that is, some would call like the new theology, but this is pre big new theology influence. Where did you kind of come to that conclusion just from your own Bible study? Because the
No,
evangelist wouldn't have told you that, would he?
well, the evangelist did have a Christ-centeredness, but evangelists do it in a series of steps, and went through 27 fundamentals, I guess, in a way. They have a sequence of presentations, gently leading to a decision. But Christ was just one of them in the series. Whereas when I went to college 5 months after becoming an Adventist. I was baptized in 61 in August. In 62, I'm at college. A very green convert, a novice convert. And the only Bible class I had, much to my chagrin, I didn't go to do the theology degree. I went to do Bible. And I had to do a B40 test, which is a glorified IQ test. And so when I fronted up to Dr. Salem on registration day, he said, "Oh, you're a mature age student." "Yes." "Oh," he says, I said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do the Bible." And he says, "Well, you go into BA theology." I said, "Is that the Bible?" "Yes." "Okay." I had no idea I was doing a degree.
He was herding you into a
And the only Bible
path.
I got was Daniel and Revelation in my first year. And I was, like all mature age students who come to do the Bible, incensed that I only got one Bible and 4 other things. And I said, I don't want Shakespeare. I did Shakespeare in high school. Thank you very much. I've had enough. And, we had some admonitions to we belly aching mature age students. And I remember Des Ford saying, if the Bible's the only book you know, you really don't know it. You need a background of literature and so on. Now, all very true. I can now understand from hindsight. But at the time, seeing as I knew precious little about the Bible, it seemed to me a frontal attack, a concentrated attack on the Bible was going to be more fruitful than a circuitous route via Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And so I still remained unhappy that I had to do English and
that was good. It was good advice, but not for someone who is perhaps hungry to just devour the Bible.
I've only just, I'm still on page numbers. I wouldn't mind knowing it a bit better. And I thought a frontal attack would be more fruitful. But it was from that DNR class that I started to realize how central Christ was. Des taught it, of course, and I owe Des a huge debt for that, without in any way casting any aspersions on the evangelist whatsoever. As Paul says in one place, one plants, another waters, but it's God that gives the increase. So in the end, all glory to God, not the human instruments that we use. But Des certainly helped me to grow dramatically in my understanding of what's the center of Christian faith. So no, not just from my own reading of the Bible. And you'd think DNR, that's not a place, well, you'd just be surprised how Des could get Christ out of all sorts of texts. And there are some where it's pretty obvious, like the stone in Daniel 2 that's cut from the mountainside, just a small boulder, bundi or whatever, hits the great image and makes it all like the chaff of a summer threshing floor. Well, he certainly waxed eloquent about Christ on that. And simple things like the one where it says in one place, Nebuchadnezzar is asking for the interpretation, and the wise men come and he says, well, tell me the dream first and then I'll believe your interpretation. And they said, oh, come on, that's not a fair question of the wise men. Nobody knows what you're not prepared to share except the gods who do not dwell with flesh. And of course, Des said, well, our God became flesh.
Mm.
And we get an exposition from John 1:14. It's Daniel where we started. And of course, in Revelation, by the time you come to Revelation, it's a revelation of Jesus Christ. So, yeah.
He enjoyed bringing everything back to the focus on Christ.
Very much so.
If there was no Des Ford during that era, because there are hundreds and hundreds of people that will say exactly what you just said, the way he spoke about Jesus, how it was profound and slightly different to what they expected perhaps an Adventist minister to say. If there was no Des Ford, would there have been other people rising up to kind of share that good news or that focus on Jesus?
Well, one would like to think so. He was unique, and he did have a gift of presentation. There were contemporaries, with him, not only at college. I mean, I later learned to respect Alf Jorgensen, deeply. Alwyn Salem made his contribution, so did Russell Crans. Were there others outside the college confines? Well, one that, of course, was in the college conference that made a huge impact on me too was Eric Magnuson. I had him for Introduction to Science, but his was not presenting Christ, but living Christ. The humility of Eric Magnuson was extremely impressive. His knowledge and understanding of science and the ability to present it so that somebody who had no science in his background, I was a fitter and turner, edge person, and I could follow Magnuson. So he had a gift of making profound things simple. I can still remember the propositional logic from Eric Magnuson. The P implies Q and all that stuff. I can still remember that.
Yeah, he was my neighbour, and when we lived on, they called it College Drive back then, didn't they? And he was next door to us, and the Salems were down there, and the Drewers and the Lindsays and the Hokins and the Irvines were all living there on the hill. When I was in junior Sabbath school, he came in and did a little talk for us, and I'll never forget it because he said to me, or he said to everybody, why have you come to Sabbath school today? And everyone chorused, because of Jesus and or whatever reasons. And he said, why? Because of Jesus. And and eventually a few of us were kind of still involved in the conversation, and I said, because Mummy and Daddy do. And he said, why do they come? And I remember as a little, I don't know, how old are you in junior? 7 or 8? I remember thinking, this is blowing my mind. And he then said, always ask the question why. And then he wrapped it up with something, and that really blew my mind. But he did it with real, he was gentle and kind and a fun guy as well.
There were people, pastors, like Pastor Naden, they were gospel preachers. And, so there were any number of others who preached the good news of Christ. But Des is the one that had me in the class for a whole year. And then further classes. Yeah. And he was a very impressive and influential person in my life.
Yeah. And I certainly would never think that there'd only be one person that would grasp something like that. I'm just interested to hear what the other contemporaries were. And when you read a lot of Ellen White, you get a lot of the love of Jesus from that too. What?
Yes.
Why do you
Yeah.
think the Adventist Church sometimes dips into a more legalistic kind of um, format or platform when you have
Oh,
when you have such amazing speakers like you've just mentioned, and a history over 100 years of people that have grasped the gospel and the love of Jesus, including Ellen White? Why
yeah.
is
I
there this
think
constant
because of
struggle?
our historical tradition, of course, with the concept of a judgment where every idle word, a misquote of that text, by the way, when you read Matthew 12:36, it's not talking about what we want it to mean. But if you've got every idle word coming into judgments, and soon, nobody knows how soon it'll move from the dead to the living, and your name will come up. That's not calculated to be Christ-centered, is it?
Mm.
And then, of course, our emphasis on the Sabbath makes us a little more law-oriented, I guess. And I'm certainly not against the Ten Commandments, and nor, of course, was Paul, the great champion, I suppose. But we're reading through the Gospels at the moment for our worship, and we just finished John, and I said, well, let's go to Mark. Now, we've done Luke, we've done John. Now let's read Mark. And I said to my wife, Mark is probably the first gospel written. It's shorter and it's very quick moving. You won't expand like Matthew does or Luke. And I said, and it's called a gospel because it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I said, that's funny that when you think of it, because we don't think of the gospel, we think of always of Paul. But here's Mark writing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I said, goodness me, what a shock. The gospel can be found in the gospel.
Yeah.
And clearly, as we read Mark, we will be reading about the good news about Jesus Christ. It will tell us that in many places in Mark. Not least the one that, says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life in exchange for all others. I mean, if that's not the gospel, God help us.
When you were talking before how you were about 23 and you'd been a fitter and turner, but hearing you talk about the gospel and you've got an incredible mind, if you don't mind me saying so, and but you left school and didn't really pursue any kind of academic advancement at that stage.
Well, it was fairly normal not to when I was a schoolboy. I did 3 years high and doing what they call a junior certificate. Then you had to go on to only a few places where you could do it, the leaving certificate, and then go to WA University, which was the only university in Perth at the time. It was just an entirely different arena, or era would be better. If you went to the university, you were 10% of the population. And who would pay for it? Well, there were scholarships available.
Yeah.
There wasn't any such thing as fee help.
No.
And my mother was a war widow. And I wanted to go farming anyway. How did I end up doing a trade? Because my mother said, I don't want you ending up a hard drinking, hard swearing, womanizing farm labor. You need to get a trade, because her belief was if you had a trade, you always had a job. That was before the pandemic. Trades did always have a job, generally speaking.
So now just moving, kind of heading back towards Glacier View, you get a phone call recently, was it, from a past student who asked you quite a profound question? Can you share
Yes. I won't give the student's name, but clearly it was soon after Glacier View, because he said 40 years ago, you said in class.
Right. So this is recently, but he would have been a
Yeah,
student.
October last year,
Yeah.
October
Okay.
2019. He rang and he said, do you mind me asking you a question about something you said in class 40 years ago? And I said, no, I don't mind. What do you say I said? And he said, you said something must have happened in 1844, but I have no idea what. And I said, I don't recall saying that. However, it has a ring of truth about it. I think it's authentic. I think your memory is reliable, because it's 40 years ago for him as well. I said, because that was about where I was at after Glacier View. I still hadn't given up 1844. I just wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced by Des's polylismatic fulfillment to embrace it. And he wasn't either, I don't think, in the end, because I remember jogging with him on the Tuesday, I think, from memory. I wouldn't swear to that. After Heppenstall had put Des on the line on the Tuesday afternoon, we were jogging together. And Heppenstall had asked about 1844, the investigative judgment in heaven. And Des choked on the word in heaven. And so he didn't want to say 1844 had any relevance to something going on in heaven. He was prepared to see it as a date where the Adventist Church arose, providentially arose. I asked him, charismatic should be able to embrace all the dates. And he said, no, not in heaven. And I said, is it all that important? This is the first time I've ever spoken about this or written about it, as far as I can recall. I said, is it all that important, Des, anyway, this 1844? And he said, that is what we're fighting for, Norm. For people to have the right to say, I don't think it's all that important, without fear of threat. That's what we're fighting for. And that's not a bad answer, is it? I don't think it's all that important, Des. Why are you doing all this for something that's not all that important? So that people can have the privilege of saying, I do not think it's all that important, without fear of threat or recrimination. And I would endorse Des's view now, I think.
That is profound.
Yeah. And of course, the student wanted to know, did I still stand by it? I said, I think the reason why I had trouble figuring out what happened in 1844 is because nothing happened in heaven in 1844. I find it really quite disturbing in a way that we who claim to be historicists, and historicism means that prophecy is fulfilled like peeling off the skins of an onion through history. So when you look at a timeline, and some of them are elaborate, that we Adventists can produce, they have dates, great long lines of dates, and when this is fulfilled in this part of the Bible and so on, except for one. We've got a date, but nothing happened in history on that date. It happened in heaven. So as though we are historicists, when it comes to Daniel 8:14, we become Platonists. And it's in heaven. It's pretty hard to refute what happened in heaven, because have you taken a photo of it? No. How do we know what happened in heaven? Well, are we going to say because of Ellen White's visions? Hang on, I thought we were interpreting the Bible. And even if Ellen White had a vision, it's still not a history date. It's not a date in history. is it?
No.
It's in heaven.
Mm.
Something that's going on in heaven. And we're not privy to that.
That's a big statement. It makes sense.
Yeah, look, I really don't want to be negative
No.
at all. And I don't think certainly most young people that I know, but even older people, we don't live with our life focused on a date,
Mm.
do we?
No.
And I doubt that too many Adventists even think of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary every 22nd of October. I'd be very surprised.
There's a big movement going on to kind of bring the church back into line with those kind of things. When you look at current politics and the rise of the more independent, fundamental, conservative ministries.
Yeah, we don't want to. I mean, the Adventist community has been a very rich experience for me. The people I know and have known through, I mean, there's a promise, isn't there, that nobody will join Christ giving up family. I didn't give up my family, but friends, yes, and will not be given back to them 100-fold. And on top of that, eternal life. Well, I can only say that particular text has been fulfilled. The Adventists are good people. They're not perfect, otherwise we wouldn't need a gospel. But we need forgiveness and mercy, and we celebrate the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper is the blood that was poured out symbolically in the Passover wine. And that was for the remission of sins. So every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we're saying we are in need of the mercy and forgiveness of God. None of us can ever celebrate the Lord's Supper and say, well, I don't need that bit, so I'll just have the bread. No, we all need mercy and forgiveness. But mercy and forgiveness, we don't want to abuse it. This is where we have to talk about how we respond. But, you know, we seem to manage that with friendships without any problem. But as soon as we bring God onto the scene, it becomes a bigger problem. If we say, I want to please God, that's legalism. Huh? But if I want to please my wife, that's a good husband. If I want to love and cherish my grandchildren, well, that's a healthy relationship. Well, if I've got God, why don't I want a healthy relationship? In fact, there are texts in the New Testament that talk about pleasing God. Why would you not want to please your Heavenly Father? Of course, the one who spared not his son. Yes, him. Who delivered him up for us all. That's the one I'm talking about, that God. I want to please him. Will I do it perfectly? No. But do I make some kind of treaty with wrongdoing? Do I make some kind of treaty with hurting the God who loved me and gave himself for me? I hope not.
That's some golden sage words there, Norm.
Well, it is funny that this works and grace seem to be such a problem to us, but it shouldn't be. The relationship is always a gift. You can never earn a relationship. You can buy her flowers and send her chocolate. But if you think for a minute that flowers and chocolate are earning her love of you, you have misunderstood love. Love is a gift. It's unearned and unearnable. If a little granddaughter says to you, I love you too, when I say in Swedish, jag älskar dig, jag älskar dig, and the little one knows it means I love you, and she'll say, I love you too, morfar, my Swedish title for grandfather, morfar. And what a gift. What a gift that child has given me. It's not earned, But does it impact on my behavior towards the one that I'm in a healthy relationship with? Well, I jolly well hope so.
Mm.
There's something wrong with the relationship if it doesn't impact on my behavior at all. Is that legalism? No.
And you're not saying to her that she has to jump certain hurdles or behave certain ways for you to give that love back. It's
No.
reciprocated, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And
You
I think
you love them before they're born.
yes.
So they're not very obedient at that stage. They're probably kicking
Yeah.
their mother's liver.
I know that feeling now. And I think also a little golden moment there when you said when you're jogging with Des, and he wasn't saying he wanted to change the minds of people to his way of thinking, but he wanted to create a space where people could say, I don't believe anything happened in heaven in 1844 or not. You want to be out of that place where you're safe to say it and you're not going to be kicked out because you've said it.
He still believed that he accepted a text like 2 Corinthians 5:10, where we'll all stand, and he's writing to Christians, we all stand before the judgment seat of Christ to give account for what we've done in the body, whether good or bad. Des accepted, but he was not comfortable with an extenuated process that at the time of Glacier View was 136 years. It's now, of course, 40 years later, so it's 176 years and growing. I won't live to see the year 200, but it's sort of on the horizon, isn't it? 200 years. It's kind of making soon a rather flexible date. And how can it be a pre-Advent judgment when it's 200 years, well, not yet, but 176 years currently, and growing from the event, the return of Jesus? We are prolonging the great disappointment, aren't we, really? Now, I want Jesus to come, but it's an expectation, it's a hope. Even with computers and logarithms and all the rest, I don't think we can set a date for it. That's in the mind and providence of God. So Des accepted a pre-Advent judgment, but it was a declaration of those who had remained in that faith relationship.
And one that was already evident in the Bible everywhere anyway. It didn't need a special date to have a prediction of a certain kind of new kind of judgment to begin.
No, exactly.
It was already well and truly established in the Bible.
Yes, you got Romans 14:10. You got references to judgment by deeds, by your works, But what kind of works? Is it because are you saved because of those works? No, those works are the fruit of that relationship, and they have no independent validity. In other words, in the judgment, not examined independently. I also think the judgment is a metaphor anyway. I don't think for a minute that God actually sits behind a big desk and angels come with all the books. It's using language that we can understand. And it's helpful language because it reminds us that the gospel of Christ is so important and so transforming in our lives that our deeds should reflect it. In other words, is there mercy in the judgment? Of course, because God it's not a different God. It's the merciful God that we know in Christ. So the idea of Jesus as the kind of defense lawyer and God as the judge, that's horrible. God is the merciful God, but he lets us know by this metaphor of a judgment that we should live out our life in Christ. It's not something you can wrap in a napkin and bury and produce it when he returns and say, well, here's your talent back.
I love that. Yeah. That's another gem today, Norm. So
And
when
some of these I'm pinching from others, of course.
when you had that moment after you'd listened to the tape of the forum meeting and you were kind of like, whoa, and you called Des. So it wasn't
I
because
wrote to him. I
you
wrote to
wrote to
him.
Des. It
Yeah.
wasn't, were you, so what you've just said there sounds like a lot of what he was kind of saying back then. At the
Yeah.
time, were you not in alignment with with that concept? Or were you more thinking, hang on, you've just dropped a bomb that's going to cause some pretty serious ramifications politically?
Um, no, it was more in between situation. I mean, Des, when I said, I don't know, Des, your solution to the problem is, like firing a pea shooter at a masonry wall, huge, thick fortress wall. And his answer was to me, well, what have you got better? Well, I said, I don't have anything better, but I'm not persuaded that yours is all that good. And I don't have to have something better to say that. And I didn't give up at that point. I still thought there is something better and it'll pop up sooner or later, but it never did. And more I started to, find myself aligning thoroughly with theirs. It wasn't a bit that I was ever against his view. I just didn't think it was sufficient. And at the end of the day, you have to say, well, the reason why we're having lots of trouble. You see, if you go back to Crozier, who wrote up Edson's vision vision, whatever, insight.
Inspired insight.
In the cornfield. It was based heavily on the spring festivals were fulfilled literally in the first advent of Christ. So the autumn festivals will be fulfilled literally also at a later date, not in the first advent. The problem with that is the New Testament does apply autumn festivals to Christ, the crucified Christ, not the just before the second coming. So I'm afraid to base 1844 on the autumn feasts is a chimera. And so in the end, because I'd studied Hebrews pretty heavily, and I'd already had a problem my second year, and this was just reading the Bible, the KJV at that, where Jesus enters into the most holy place in the KJV translation. I went to Des with that in my second year. And Des said, calm down. In your third year and fourth year, we will spend a lot of time on that issue. And which we did. So certain doubts were already there and difficulties, if you like, the difficulties of trying to present it. When I knew that Hebrews applied the autumn feasts not to the predicting the second advent, but to the first advent, the achievement of Christ. And if the atonement is achieved at Calvary, which is something our pioneers didn't say and couldn't say, though Ellen White did in places. Ellen White's a bit of a mixed bag, you can find text that will support this.
That's true.
But the appendix in Questions on Doctrine, quoting Ellen White, show very clearly she used the word atonement for the cross, and so does the New Testament. And I just have to finally admit I'm having trouble saying what happened because nothing did happen. In heaven, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
On earth, as Des said, providentially, the Adventist Church rose up with a message about the second advent, the hope, the expectation of it. 176 years after 1844, that in itself is proving us that 1844 is our early pioneers talked about the judgment coming very soon. So the 1844 and the second Advent were one event. They do believe in a pre-Advent judgment. Today, because there's 176 years gap, we can have we can have the date 1844, or we can have a pre-Advent judgment, but we can't have both. If we talk about a pre-Advent judgment, that's not back in 1844. That's too far away.
The investigative judgment is kind of the only unique kind of little module of Adventism. Does that scare some people if you take it away?
Yes, it would scare some people to take away. We have to have a raison d'etre, and this is the only teaching that's not found in the other churches.
I'm just going to pause that for a moment. Gillian has just put up her hand. Oh no, she was waving goodbye. Back to the conversation. And this is a fascinating part of the program where Dr. Norm Young mentions that nothing happened in heaven, only the Adventist Church being a providential movement on earth. So this is quite an important thing that he's talking about. And I've just said, well, if you then believe that nothing happened in heaven that night, you're kind of doing away with the investigative judgment, the sanctuary doctrine, as envisaged in Vision by Ellen G. White. And I'm saying, well, doesn't that kind of water down the church if you take it away? And let's continue listening what he answers.
Baptists are fairly comfortable with being Baptists, but they're not the only ones who baptize by immersion. And yet that is their unique thing. The Baptists have taken that ritual that they focus on as their name. In the same way we've taken Seventh-day Adventist as our name, because Adventists were a split group and we distinguished ourselves by being the seventh-day ones of the Adventist group.
If it's a providential thing, though,
I don't feel we have to have anything that's unique. Our experience is unique. Our history is unique. But why should we worry if we're sharing viewpoints? Some of our emphases are fairly unique. I don't think there are too many churches have an emphasis on a holistic lifestyle that we have. Some of those things, but our history is unique. I mean, my family is unique, but we're not the only humans on the planet. We're not the only married couple on the planet. We're not the only ones that got grandchildren on the planet. That's true, but we still are unique. So you don't have to have something that nobody else has got. No. Nobody else has got our history. Nobody else has got our experience. So we are unique, and we don't have to come up with a far-fetched, highly difficult viewpoint to prove to be unique. Adventists are unique.
If this was me now, the 5 years later me, I would have pushed him a little bit more on that, because, and maybe I do, I know in my mind I wanted to, but I tended to not rock the boat as much maybe, but I would have pushed the notion that the claim is not that we're just unique, like the Baptists call themselves unique because their focus is on baptism, but the Adventist claim to uniqueness is a special message, so that the message is not only unique, but it's a remnant calling that actually rectifies the injustice and the vindicates God. So I struggle with people that claim these kind of things, and it's not a criticism of Norm at all. But I feel like it's kind of a defense of Adventism that's a little bit smoke and mirrors. I might be wrong. What do you guys think? And the thing is that Buddhism, Taoism, Baptists, there's plenty of other providential movements that have arisen that are unique in their own way as well. I think
Yeah,
Adventists want to try and claim that they're more than unique, they are chosen and therefore uniquely
yeah,
different to everything else.
yes.
Yeah, there you go. That's interesting. 5 year ago, me did drill down a bit on that, and I'm saying, yeah, everyone can claim to something unique, but this is different to that. This is extra special. Good on you. 5 year ago, Pete.
Um,
And that's a big push, isn't it?
yes.
And more these days.
Yeah, the doctrine of the remnant can certainly make us the exclusive vehicle of the message of what? Of the soon coming of Christ? No, we're not the only ones preaching the soon coming of Christ. So what's this remnant? We're the only ones preaching the three angels' message? Well, the Mormons claim to be preaching the three angels' message. A different message, mind you, but the same text.
Mm. It strikes me that a lot of what you're saying, what's the right word for it? Not shocking, but would be quite astounding for some people to take on board, some Adventists. But you think there's a place for Adventists? Do you think this dream that Des had, where people could say what you're saying and be accepted, has actually come to fruition? Or do you think that sadly maybe there isn't a place for people to say what you're saying for that kind of an Adventist?
Yes, well, we'll soon find out. If you find me cut and quartered on the front lawn, you'll know we're not ready to allow people to have various opinions. All movements that are as large as ours and as widespread as ours, I don't know how many million, but 20 million probably, worldwide, 20 million Adventists in every kindred nation that you can think of. And so a huge variation is going to develop a left wing and a right wing. There's no political party in the world that doesn't have a left wing and a right wing. No group, whether it be the Returned Soldiers League or whatever, will have left and right. There's always going to be a conservative. And these are creative things, I think. I think they have a creative role, as long as they can respect each other. They have a creative role of helping keep us on the balance. But I would like to think we're getting to a point where somebody can take a viewpoint that's not where perhaps even the majority are. I mean, you can see this happening with a simple thing like the ordination of women. If you go to certain parts of the world where women are in the kitchen having, doing the cooking and the bedroom having babies, but the male is all and in all, it's going to be fairly difficult for them to catch on to where a liberal Western society might be, I suppose. But personally, I think wherever women are oppressed, we should protest against it. I don't think we should excuse it because, well, this is how it is culturally. I mean, the fact that domestic violence appears to be so accepted in certain societies just north of us doesn't make that right, does it?
No.
And we ought to be able to say what you think is your cultural right, but don't hide it. Don't hide this sin by calling it cultural. Let's call sin by its right name.
Do you think that's why there was such an outpouring of grief over the no vote at the last GC session?
Well, undoubtedly, because they were trying to reach a compromise. That is, that each division, according to where they were at in their experience, social experience, could handle it, and others it might take longer before they can get a mind around it. So Australia, the South Pacific Division would be able to choose to ordain women because it's where our society is at. Now, we're not doing it because that's where our society is at. It's just that our society has confronted us with something. And when we stop and think about it in the light of the gospel of Christ, we know it's right. The questions might be actually put to us by our society, but our answers we're going to give are going to be from our Christian base. But the fact that our society has led the way and we're still counting the jolly numbers is incredible to me.
And I think under Jan Paulsen, and I'm not saying he was a perfect leader at all, but I think under his leadership, if he or someone like him had been president at the time of the last session, the last GC program, meeting, whatever, I think the vote may have gone the other way. It might have been a more positive outcome. But under the current climate, where I believe, this is me saying, not saying you're saying this, but with the current president, Ted Wilson seems to be lobbying everyone to take the church to kind of a different place. And with the introduction of the compliance document that I mentioned before, I'm seeing less hope for the freedom of women and equality within the church than more hope. How can people feel that things are changing in a positive light under those kind of circumstances?
We have to face the fact that the world at large has lurched to the right, politically, economically. The right is where the strength is at the moment, not the left. That's just a fact of our world at the moment. Our world is a conservative world, by and large. And our church is no different. That's why fundamentalism has thrived, not just in Christian faith, but also in other faiths as well. I don't believe that all faiths are the same. I mean, I don't believe in the karmic cycle, so it's very difficult for me to be a Hindu. And because I don't believe in the karmic cycle, I don't see the gospel of Buddhism as a gospel. I don't need release from the karmic cycle, which is what Buddhism is all about, because I don't believe in the karmic cycle. I don't believe that I come back according to how I lived this life. And anyway, that's a form of legalism with bells on, I would have thought, that I try and live a good life so I won't come back as a fly.
That's similar to the investigative judgment, though.
Yes, it is.
So why would you not take on board Buddhism or Hinduism because of that kind of thing that is something that doesn't align with you, but you have taken on Adventism and stayed, even though there's a similar parallel between that karmic sort of comparison?
Okay, except that the karmic cycle is central to Hinduism in a way, and also central to Buddhism. Buddhism is a pathway that delivers me from the karmic cycle, so I won't be in this rebirth on and on.
One major path of Buddhism does, but another major path doesn't. They don't believe in a supernatural ongoing reincarnation.
Well, no Buddhist really can believe in that, because the whole thing is to bring our desires to a standstill, because that's what feeds the karmic cycle. So you wouldn't get a Buddhist saying comfortably that his viscera was moved within him, of which it speaks of Jesus many times, where his viscera was tightened within him with compassion. No. A Buddhist has to bring all desire to a standstill, and that stops the feeding of the karmic cycle, and that gives me nirvana, which is just simply cessation.
So if Norm Young is a Buddhist and he's evangelizing Buddhism, but he realizes he doesn't believe in that karmic kind of thought anymore, does he successfully continue to be a Buddhist?
Not really. Well, not a Theravada Buddhist anyway. He might be a Manana Buddhist because they're sort of more loose. But I think the Theravada Buddhism is nearer to the teaching of the Buddha. And your question is like saying, if Jesus' death on the cross was not a saving event, would you still be able to be a Christian? Well, yeah.
I'm putting it in a subset, though. You could put it in that way with Christ and Christianity and the cross, but I'm putting it in the Adventist subset. Okay. If Norm Young's an Adventist and he comes to the point where one of the fundamental kind of karmic equivalent beliefs is not something he agrees with anymore, can he still successfully evangelize Adventism and bring people into the church?
I think so. I've done so.
And as they poke their head in the door and see the compliance document hanging from the rafters, what do you say to them then?
I'd have to prepare them for that. It is true, you do have to be prepared. But, you know, I know so many Adventists, and as I've said already, Adventists don't go to bed on October 22 thinking of the pioneers.
I think many are, though, now. I think there's a real growth in the last...
Well, I've looked at the last two records.
The last few years.
Nearest to October 22 and looked in vain for some comment about...
I don't think the record's the place to go to find anything challenging with regards to
you would think on the 22nd of October. On the 22nd of October.
Oh, I see what you're saying. When we had the recent 22nd of October, there was no mention of it in the record.
Not that I could find. And certainly no editorial.
Just another thought here from 2025 Pete, not 2020 Pete, those who are listening on the actual podcast. I personally would suggest that even more so than 5 years ago, what I said there is happening. There's a real return to the traditional values and teachings of the Adventist Church, and the pedestalizing, is that the right word? Putting Ellen even higher on a pedestal is happening within the church to a greater degree. And currently, with the politics happening in the world, there's a real thrust of interest in the Sunday law, the mark of the beast, 1844. I think, though, I wish Norm was right. I think that it's proving to be less so, and it'll be interesting doing the 50th anniversary. This is the 45th anniversary retrospective of the 40th anniversary. In 5 years' time, we'll have a 50th, and let's see the progress. I'll probably be sitting here in a wheelchair and a blankie, but yeah. Anyway, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Norm is very insightful.
So I don't think it looms large on the Adventist ethos.
So I'm saying it does loom large now.
Or psyche, perhaps, Adventist psyche. Could I accept the teachings of Jesus, the values of the teaching of Jesus, and not accept his being God incarnate and his death being an atoning death? I would find it very hard to cease following the Christ way, because I think it's an excellent way to live, his teaching, his values. Whether I can separate them from the theological side of his teaching, I don't know. I remember once meeting up on my walks down Alton Road with the late Pastor Ray Stanley. And because we bumped into each other fairly frequently, Chris Aykroyd, my walking partner, and myself with Ray Stanley. This particular day, Chris was somewhere else, and I was walking by myself down Alton Road, and I catch up to Ray Stanley, who was a very good walker, mind you. And he was an evangelist and fairly conservative, but a decent man. And we got on quite well as walking partners and conversing partners while we walked. And I asked Ray one time, Ray, if Gabriel came to you and sat on the edge of your bed and said, Pastor Stanley, you've lived a long and good life. You've preached about Christ's coming in many a picture theatre and hall. But I want to tell you, you will not live to see him come. Indeed, none of your children or grandchildren will live to see him come. Now, Gabriel's told you this on the foot of your bed, Ray. I said, would you still be a Christian? Now, admittedly, I did say Christian, not Adventist. And he thought for a little while, not long, a split second, I guess, but he did hesitate. And then he said, no, I would still be a Christian. I said, I think that's the right answer, Ray, because the reason why we became Christians is not because we were scared stiff by the soon coming of Christ, not because of fear, but because of the attractiveness of Christ, the attractiveness of his person, of his teaching, of his behavior, of his death, and the hope of his return through his resurrection and ascension. But I said we didn't become Adventists simply because of the second coming of Christ. And even if that event didn't happen in our lifetime or our grandchildren's lifetime, I would still be a Christian. And an Adventist Christian. I mean, it is in Adventism that I learned the gospel of Christ. It's in this context. Now, admittedly, I've read widely, and I've read evangelical literature as well as less evangelical literature. But it is within Adventism that I heard the gospel. And particularly Des Ford was a major spokesperson, but not the only one.
That's a nice little segue back into a couple of questions about Glacier View that I wanted to go. And someone has asked me to do a timeline that they can see. So I've got a little whiteboard I'm just going to bring over. And also, can I just say that I think that when that student rang you, well, it's going to be hard to see, isn't it? When that student rang you and you said, what you said to him, oh boy, this is not, I should have thought this out a bit more before. That'll do. You won't be able to read it, I'm sure. I think what a wonderful, authentic and honest thing to say to him. I think a lot of young people these days really seek that authenticity and that honesty. So I think good on you for speaking your truth to him and saying your truth, you know.
I think that he was already, when he rang me, moving in his own thinking. I don't know. He didn't tell me where he was at, but he certainly had it. I mean, we talked on the phone for quite a long time, and we emailed once or twice. And the kind of questions he was asking clearly were growing out of somewhat along the lines of where I was at when I spoke 40 years ago in class. I think something happened in 1844, but I don't know what. And I think he was moving in that direction himself.
Have you spoken of that publicly much yourself before?
You mean the phone conversation of the
that you don't believe anything? No. That you don't believe anything supernatural happened in 1844.
In heaven.
In heaven.
Yes. Did I believe anything happened in heaven?
Yeah.
Yes, I said there was a forum over in the Uniting Church, I think, in the trees in Morisset.
Oh, yes.
That Lyndon Rogers, who is the chair of the Sydney Forum, we had a question there, question and answer, and I was on the panel, and I was asked that question, and I said I don't think anything happened. And how would you refute that? By demonstrating something did happen?
Exactly. You can't.
Give me a video of it.
Yeah, that's when you have to go, well, this is what Ellen White said. That's what that's the loop, though, isn't it? You go, well, Ellen White said that, but Ellen White said go back to the Bible, and if the Bible disagrees with my light, well, that's new light, so follow that instead of what I'm saying, and it
Yeah.
creates this loop. So I just want to. This is mainly for a lot of young people that have said they're just not 100% sure of the timeline, and so.
So I just want to refer to what Dr. Young was saying there before we get into the Glacier View and my timeline there, which will be interesting to see if that goes well. What he was saying about Buddhism, I just wanted to highlight, and he obviously knows a lot about Buddhism. When the Buddhists talk about desire, they aren't saying that you should lose all desire. What they're referring to, when you understand some of the translations, is the cravings. And so I just wanted to point that out, because I think that makes my argument that I just had with him, that it makes the equation I had between Buddhism and Adventism a little bit more similar. So the Buddhists don't say let go of desire. What they were referring to is don't let go of the cravings. That's what they try and minimize. The other important thing I wanted to say was that Norm was suggesting there that even though he has jettisoned the notion that anything happened in 1844 in heaven, he's let go of that, he still thinks the Adventist Church is providential, and 1844 saw a providential movement arising called, which later became the Adventist Church. And his suggestion is that because he found the gospel within the Adventist Church, that means you can jettison some of these key beliefs and it's still okay. And I said to him, a few minutes ago, and this, by the way, is 2025 Pete talking, not the 2020 version. So if you're listening on the podcast, which is kicking off again today, you'll know that this is 2025 Pete talking, and we're listening back to 2020 interviews from season 2. When I guess what I would push a little bit harder now on Dr. Young is if he realized, and in my humble opinion, with love in my heart, as I have been a former Adventist looking in from the outside, I see Adventism as a little bit more less benign than the other Protestant movements. So, for example, I said to him earlier, if you brought someone into the church, even though you didn't believe in 1844 as a supernatural happening in heaven in 1844, as they walk in and they peer in and they see the big sign saying compliance document and all sorts of other traps that they could fall into, the mark of the beast, the close of probation, the time of trouble, these things that are wrapped in a cocoon of legalism, he said, well, I would just prepare them for that. And I guess I'm saying 5 years on, it would be even harder to prepare them for that. But people of his generation and my generation, who had a much, we kind of had Adventist light, Seventh-day Adventism light for many years, where there seemed to be more balance. Sure, there were the pitfalls, and the legalism, but there was also a lot of people doing a more gospel-focused presentation of Adventism. That, in my humble opinion, is less so now, and you would have to do a whole lot of preparation now if you brought someone into the church of what they might stumble upon. And so while I respect that Norm and myself, we had a much more gospel-focused Des Ford-style Adventism that people like Norm and others contributed to, we certainly are heading towards a more traditional, original-style, legalistic kind of Adventism. So if you brought someone in now, I think it would be even harder to prepare them for these pitfalls. So that's kind of my 2 cents worth on my reflections on this conversation, and we'll get back into it as we now get back into the conversation of Glacier View. But I do ponder this notion that if you are able to jettison ideas within the Adventist church and remain an Adventist, would you, if you were a Mormon, and this is a hypothetical that Norm gave a similar one about his friend with Stan, so I'm just giving him a hypothetical. If you were a Mormon and you jettisoned some of the key unique doctrines, would you still remain a Mormon? My theory is that someone like Norm, and I can't speak for him, but the more gospel Adventists, if they were Mormons and they jettisoned some of the key Joseph Smith teachings, that would unravel their whole experience with Mormonism and they would leave. But because a lot of them see Adventism as having this potential and health movement and schools and lots of positive areas, which there are, and because they can find the gospel in there, they don't see these red flags as profoundly as I do, having left. Does that make sense? Do you agree? I find that Adventism is not the benign religion that a lot of the more gospel Adventists think it is. And so when they quite casually refer to, well, yeah, I don't believe it, that anything happened in heaven in 1844, but I found the gospel here. And oh, look, if I brought people into the church, I would just warn them of the things they may stumble across. To me, it's like, yeah, if you're a Mormon and you said, look, yeah, I don't agree with Joseph Smith, and I think a lot of what he said that came from God to him wasn't accurate, and I don't believe that Moroni came to him and gave him these plates. But I've found the gospel within Mormonism, and I'm happy to stay. I just don't think they would, because the Mormonism, when you question some of those things, you already have a bit of an inkling then that there's something really profoundly wrong with it. Whereas with Adventism, there's been a really good sales job in making everyone think that it's just another Protestant movement. We just go to church on Sabbath. That's all. Happy Sabbath. Enjoy your haystacks. I think there's something a bit darker within Adventism that a lot of the gospel Adventists don't see. That's just my 2 cents. A couple of people have just said, and thanks for letting me know I was muted, but I'll cut that bit out. You're telling a wonderful story, Peter, but Dale says, Peter, you are going to have to tell your story again. Which story is that? Anyway, we'll get back to the conversation, and we're about to now dig into some of the Glacier View aspects. Enjoy.
You can't really see it there, I know, but I'll just kind of speak it out loud and I'll hold it up close later for someone if they want to kind of, well, they can take notes. But we've got the forum meeting, that's the 1979, that's kind of the big splash explosion thing, isn't it, that happened?
Yeah,
That's October as well, is it?
Yeah, October 1979.
So that creates this big kind of...
I'm not sure of the date. I think off the top of my head, the 27th of October, but I'm not certain. 27th of October, 1979, in PUC. And it was a forum where Des was promised that forums were places where you could speak your mind and without fear of any kind of fallout.
It's interesting. I've heard about that meeting for many years, but I listened to it for the first time this morning.
Okay.
Jill posted it on one of the feeds here, one of the posts, and so while I was having a shower this morning, I turned the volume up, and it goes for about an hour and 2 minutes. So I didn't have an hour shower, but
I hope not. 4 minutes max.
I reckon it could have been a half an hour. But I can see why your jaw dropped when you heard the tape back then. Yes. It was very powerful, and like you, he has a really good way of speaking publicly. Quick sidetrack: you were the Friday night speaker for my graduation at Avondale College,
Oh, is that
and
right?
what I remember is you started the evening's talk by saying, you will not remember that Norm Young spoke tonight, but you will. I hope you will take away the message I'm about to tell you." And of course, I remember that you spoke that night, but I can't remember what the message was.
Well, do you remember one of the illustrations? I
No.
find often people remember the
I,
illustration, but not what it was illustrating.
you know what I was thinking at the time? I thought, now that he's said that, that's what I'm going to remember. Oh no.
I forgive you, Peter. I'll tell you now, I don't even remember that I took the Friday night meeting when you graduated, and I don't have a clue what I spoke on. And I don't remember you in the grad class either.
No, I think I only just made it. I
I'm
was in a
sure you
group.
did.
I was in a group called the Beagles, and we spent a lot of time playing music and writing songs rather
Did
than
you say
actually
that? Did you say the Beatles?
Beagles.
Oh, the Beagles, not the Beatles.
Yeah, imagine, boy, yeah. Anyway, so back to our timeline. So
Yeah,
we've got the forum meeting, but
yeah,
before Glacier View, which what that date was what? August 1980.
yeah. August 1980.
So August 1980. Des gets a
And
call.
remember the 27 fundamentals as they then were had been passed at the General Conference in 1980. So they were a newly minted.
And they were what were they called? The Dallas
Yes,
something?
that's correct.
The Dallas document or something?
Yeah, the Dallas fundamental statement. And number 23 was the one on the sanctuary.
Right. Oh, well, that starts to make a bit of sense too. So it was fresh in everyone's mind. So at
Yeah,
some
that's it.
point between October and August the next year, Des gets a call from Neil, and Neil says, "Put together your thoughts, and we want you to come to Glacier View and present them in a more we want to critique them more than just the forum, which was just a way
Oh,
to just these are my thoughts."
yeah. No, he was given 6 months leave of absence from PUC, where he was a professor, and sent to Washington, D.C. There was a guiding committee that was appointed with people like Jim Cox and that on it. And he produced this manuscript over that 6 months period. And that Glacier View responded to that manuscript. Des was to be present, but he wasn't to speak. But in the end, some of the heavies said, well, we'd like to hear from him as well. So Des was given the opportunity to speak.
So we've got this 6 months, and we're not sure what point you were given manuscripts, but sometime before there.
Oh, sometime before the August, and I can remember certainly having them in July.
Yeah.
So at least a month.
Okay. Now, how long did Glacier View actually go for?
Oh, it was a week.
So there's a week here. Now, at the end of that week, who gets together and puts this other document, the consensus document, together? Who puts that together?
There was a committee, and it was written up. I think Bill Johnson had a fair, but it was based on what the small groups were saying.
Right.
And the consensus statement, as it was called, was written up by a smaller group, but drawing on what the little study groups, what their reports were. And
Right.
I think they did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah,
I think it reflected what the smaller groups were saying. And then it was put to the plenary session, if I can use that sort of language,
yeah.
on the Friday morning.
This is in that week. still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And all the people who had been involved in Glacier View through the small groups and that assembled for a final, and the consensus document was put to the vote. And I think it virtually, I hesitate to say unanimous, but I think it was unanimous.
Yeah.
Or very, very close to unanimous, accepted by
So
the large group.
yeah.
And I can remember Des Ford being asked by Fred Veltman. I was right near the two of them. And Fred Veltman said to Des, what do you think, Des? And Des's response, now, you forget over 40 years an awful lot of stuff, obviously. But there are some bits and pieces that stick like a burr. And Des's response to Fred Veltman is stuck like a burr. He said, I think, or maybe I believe, I'm not sure of the verb, I believe I can live within this.
Yes. That's what I was about to say. So for this moment in time, there's this glimmer of hope where he says, I can live with this.
Yeah.
And I think what happens next, and I kind of want to defend you a bit here a lot.
All right, I don't mind being
Your in jumps the politicians and the administrators, not willing to kind of accept this consensus, realizing it may kind of shake the church a little bit more than they would like. And so they draw upon material that you've written with 6 other guys, which has become famously known as the 10-point statement or document.
Mm.
And I think, and I might be wrong, but I read an article of yours where you were talking, what was it called? Help me out, you wrote it. Where you were saying it was you regretted being involved, or what was the title of the article?
Oh, was it a reluctant?
That's it. Yes.
Participant looks back at Glacier View.
I found that a really interesting article. I'd encourage people to read that. So you were reluctant, but do you think that it may have been worse than that, and they kind of used your material, which basically went on to highlight some key differences from the consensus that were actually very different to what Des had been saying?
Yeah.
Do you feel a little bit thrown under the bus with what happened then?
Well, I don't think I was thrown under the bus. I think I was hit by a bus, but nobody threw me there. I wasn't pushed or shoved. I just blindly went ahead and got hit by a bus. But not totally blindly. I mean, Neil Wilson was obviously a very consummate administrator.
Mm.
I wasn't. And he came to me on the breakfast time, I think on the Wednesday, and asked me would I be on this small group. And
So this is in that week, the Glacier View week.
Yes.
And they called this a Sanctuary Review Committee.
That's right. It was the Sanctuary Review Committee, the whole thing. But they wanted to do this little subcommittee because he said some of the administrators don't know where Des is differing from the church's positions. And they need a little statement just outlining for administrators, clarify where Des differs from the church. And I felt queasy about the request. I mean, I was only at Glacier View because Des had invited me. He asked for the privilege of having 4 people present that he had chosen.
So, sorry, just to clarify, was Neil aware of the consensus document at this stage? Had that already come out?
Well, it was in process still.
Right. So, but did he maybe was get a feeling that the consensus thing was not
Oh,
going to be enough?
ah, yes. Oh, yes. I think that the direction it was headed, the consensus document was going to be a blending of all the small groups, where the small groups were mostly headed. If the consensus document reflected that, as it did, then it was certainly something that Des might well be able to live with. It wasn't something that was going to be difficult for Des to accept. There'd be some things that he wouldn't have been entirely happy with, but there was probably some things in that consensus document that nobody was entirely happy with. In other words, that's what a consensus is. A consensus,
it's not total agreement.
It's to find something that all, not the preferred view of anybody, but the best view that all of us could agree on.
Yeah. So tell us more about that conversation. He comes up to you while you're having breakfast.
Yeah, well, first of all, why I was at Glacier View was because Des had requested me.
Just a quick addition there from 2025, Pete. That's profound, what was just said there. Absolutely profound. Go back a few minutes and listen back to that at some point. Just what Norm was confirming there, that myself and others certainly had a hunch that Neil was manoeuvring. He was possibly realizing that there was going to be a consensus, and he was thinking, what can I do to scuttle that?
So that's where the reluctant participant came from. I did not want to go. I had enough nous to know I don't think this is going to be pretty. And I'm a loyal Seventh-day Adventist on the one hand. I'm trying to be a loyal friend on the other. I could see me as a general fighting on two fronts, or a horse rider on two horses. It just looked unwinnable.
It looked unwinnable.
Yeah, or unpleasant, probably a better word. And anyway, I went, and then on the Wednesday, Wilson himself approached me and said, would I be on this small panel to clarify where there's different. I went first to Jim Cox, because I'd grown to respect this man, even though I didn't know him well. I didn't know him at all before going to Glacier View, but he was a leading New Testament scholar and a very enjoyable person and a very insightful one. And he said, it's a very hard ask, Norm, a hard ask. So I thought, oh, well, I'll go to Des himself, which I did. I went to Des himself and said, look, they've asked me to be on this committee that's going to say where you differ from the Church Orthodox teaching. What do you think? And Des says, better you than somebody else. Well, in actual fact, the best answer would have been better somebody else than you, Norm. But anyway, that was Des's response.
He may have realised that when Neil said, I just want it for the admin clarification, that it may have been a little bit more far-reaching than that.
Yeah. The people.
What a nice thing to say to you, though.
Yeah. Yes, it was nice.
Yeah.
But still not enjoyable. So we met only twice. I guess we met sometime on the Wednesday, I'm not sure when. And we divided them up, who was going to write on what of the 10 points. I only had the one, and I only take responsibility for that one.
Number 2.
Whatever it is. I printed them out somewhere. I did try and clarify the law about 25 years later, who wrote what. and I can tell you what I think it was. And I wrote to all the people who were still, that I could still write to. The first one was methodology, then the Day of Atonement in the Book of Hebrews. Yes, that's me. Number two, as you said, the phrase within the veil. That was by Dedron. The methodology was probably Spengler, but it may have been Londas. Londas was the secretary. The phrase within the veil was Dedron. The year-day principle was Arthur Furch, lamented after Furch. The apotelosmatic principle was Douglas. The use of SDAQ in Daniel 8:14 was Furch. The relationship of Daniel 7:8 and 9 was Furch. Antioch's epiphanies was Dedron. And saints in the judgment was Furch. And the role of Ellen G. White in doctrinal understanding was either Londas or Douglas. I think on reflection, probably Douglas, because Herb Douglas was involved with the White estate. And the methodology was probably Londas. Spengler was the chair of it, but I don't think he wrote anything. Now, if you look at my statement, you'll find it one place, and this was pointed out to me at a workers' meeting on Glacier View, that I wrote in the third person. And I also got Des to read mine. So I made one little change because he pointed something out. So I had Spengler's permission to show my draft to Des. So I had Des read it. So I knew, and Des himself said of all the 10 points that they were accurate representations of his view and how they differed from orthodoxy. But I was positive. I wrote, there is agreement that on within the veil and things like that. But there's one place where we've changed from the third person to almost confessional, but we do say, we go to the first person. And that was written by the committee, not by me.
Right.
So I don't own that bit.
And what?
Now, the part that I profoundly regret, and I shared it with Des and said, we have to have something like this because it's got to go through a screening committee. And I said that it'll get thrown out, I said, because it's so positive. But if we end up with this sentence, these are unwarranted differences from the church or something like that, we'll get it through. They'll only read that line. They won't really read all the positive statements I've said.
What was the line again?
But I will never say this again. I don't know. But I'll have to go to the 10-point statement in the October. Well, I don't know where the 10 points are in this. This came out in October 1980, special sanctuary issue of the ministry. And somewhere in it, don't ask me when, why didn't I mark it? Hey, I did mark it. Hey, how about that? It's marked. Statement on Desmond Ford document. It says, I'll read the whole thing if you like. The Day of Atonement in the Book of Hebrews. In his position paper, Dr. Ford asserts emphatically that the Epistle to the Hebrews teaches that the risen Christ, by virtue of his own blood or sacrificial death, entered into the heavenly most holy place at his ascension. See his works 187, 195, the position paper as it was called. The cleansing of the heavenly things mentioned in Hebrews 9:23, he also believes applies only to the initial New Testament period. The Day of Atonement sacrifice, as well as the other Levitical sacrifices and the high priest's entrance into the most holy place, finds fulfillment according to Ford in Christ's death and ascension into the presence of God. Christ then is the high priest of God's right hand, has opened up a new access and center of worship for the people of God. Ford declares that he can find in Hebrews no allusion to Daniel or any reference to a two-phase ministry of the risen Christ. He does affirm, however, the reality of the heavenly sanctuary. There is basic agreement that Christ, at his ascension, entered into the very presence of God, as symbolized by the earthly high priest's entrance on the Day of Atonement. There is also general acceptance that neither Daniel nor a two-phased ministry are referred to in the Epistle to the Hebrews. But we do deny, now this is where we change from third person to, but we do deny that his entrance into the presence of God, one, precludes a first apartment phase of ministry, or two, marks the beginning of the second phase of his ministry, assuming that there is a second phase. That was added by the screening committee. So I don't take any blame for that. Ford believes that the heavenly sanctuary intercession of Christ finds a providential crisis in what he understands to be the rediscovery of the gospel through a new appreciation of the sanctuary symbolism. See page 260 of his position paper. This rediscovery he relates to the 1844 movement and the visions of Ellen G. White. See page 260 again. However, Ford denies that Christ's heavenly ministry climaxes in the initiation of a judgment intercession beginning in 1844, and then page numbers. Ford does believe that the Day of Atonement imagery finds fulfillment in judgment, even pre-Advent judgment, in the book of Revelation. This latter, however, is a declaration at the close of Christ's heavenly intercession, just before the second Advent. It is not a heavenly judicial process beginning in 1844. The proclamation that providentially began in 1844 refers, in Ford's opinion, only to the believer's present decision of faith and the future pre-Advent judgment, but not to a present judicial process in heaven. Pages 652, etc. And then the sentence, which I profoundly regret to this day: this is an unwarranted reduction of Adventist belief. And now, I didn't believe that sentence at the time I wrote it. And really, it was put there as a way of getting through what was basically approving of much of what Des had said. And I said there's general agreement. I didn't even put my own neck out. General agreement in the groups. But I said, if we want to get it through the screen, we're going to have to give them something like this. Des had reluctantly agreed to it. And I did try and change it. I saw Spangler on the Friday morning and said, I want to change that last sentence. But he says it's too late.
Was that because he was kind of, Neil had gotten in his ear?
I don't know. I wasn't privy to any of the administrative toing and froing. But I would say probably he was right. It had all been through the screening committee. They were already printing it all up. I don't know.
That's a pretty heavy thing to have pondered when you say that you feel that you regretted saying that, because it's a sad thing in life to have to deal with. We all do things, don't we? We all have things we've done we wish we could take back. Yeah. And to have to, live with that. It was
done on pragmatic grounds. I didn't think that the way I'd written it up for Des, that it would that it would pass through unscathed. Well, it didn't pass through unscathed. They did that additional piece about we do deny. But I think it would have been even brutalized even more. But they would have grabbed that final sentence and hung on that, which is really said something that didn't really suit what I'd written.
Perhaps
now
you...
it is, of course, what I wrote there, even though I've said there's general agreement, I don't mean general agreement in the church. It was out of sync with our standard beliefs.
Yeah.
So I hadn't fulfilled, I guess, the requirement, which was to show where Des differed from orthodoxy, but to some degree I did, because I outlined at the start sort of the teachings to some degree. But anyway.
If you had your time again, you might have put it was a warranted reduction.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So
thank God for this creative, piece of lateral thinking. That.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about social media and this discussion, and we can be open, we can rectify the past, we can heal, we can not have it suppressed or hidden. So you have your 10 points. Everyone's expecting they're going to be delivering the consensus document, and Des is going to be, yep, I can live with that. How did they get that off the table and bring in the 10 points?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but I think it was already Plan B, that statement. I think they already could see which way the small groups were going, and I don't think the consensus statement shocked the boots off them. I tell you what did shock the boots off them. Des says it's moving in my direction. Now, I used to tell Des, you ought not to say that because it puts yourself center stage. I mean, there were movements among Adventist scholarship that were already thinking independently of Des the same sort of things. And instead of saying the scholars agree with me, I wanted him to say, I agree with most of the Adventist scholars. Just a minor thing, just to show that there was a community of thinking in the way. But as always, they were aligning themselves with Des, rather than Des was actually reflecting where many of them were. But be that as it may, he said there are 12 places which are quite harmonious with my position paper. That was the 1,000-word document, the position paper. And of course they said, where? And of course he listed them very quickly. And you can find them in that October issue of the ministry, 12 things that Des was comfortable with in the consensus statement. Well, of course, once they knew that Des had 12 things which the consensus statement he was happy with, they dropped the consensus statement, like a hot scone. And they said, bring in Plan B, which was the 10-point statement. Now, that was highly unfortunate because the people who wrote it not with that in view, that in mind. And secondly, it was never put to the vote. There was no contribution other than, Furch, Blondus, Young, Dedrin, and Dedrin, and somebody else. Spangler, of course, but he didn't actually contribute. He was the chair. I just can't remember off the top of my head. That's most of them anyway.
Yeah.
I think there were only the 6 of us, actual fact.
Yeah, I read that there was 6 of you.
Yeah, that includes Spangler.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 6 plus Spangler, but I could be totally wrong. I wasn't there.
Well, I was, but that was a long time ago. Oh, Douglas. Yeah, Douglas.
Oh, right.
So Londus, Douglas, Furch, Dedrin, Young. Oh, that's only It's only 5.
Oh, okay, so it was 5 and Spangler was 6, but he
Yeah,
was more of a chairperson.
he was the chairperson. He didn't
Yeah.
write anything. And we only met twice, once to say who would write what, and then the second time to have each one read out their draft statement, which the other members could comment on. But there was very little input from the others, I'd say 0, and very little comment. It was done in great haste because I was Wednesday morning, I was invited.
2 meetings.
Yeah, and then we had to submit it by Thursday, and it went to the screening committee on the Thursday night. So yeah.
When that then goes to the screening committee, it's suddenly what happens in the meetings? Does Neil get up and say, right,
I don't remember.
We're going to bring Des to accountability. Come and have a meeting with us, Des. Agree with this, or you're out. What was that kind of next stage?
Well, I wasn't there, so that's very difficult for me to answer that. I was at the screening committee as that went through. We were there, the people who had drafted it, just simply, I don't know, as observers. We weren't sitting at the same table. It was a fairly large group, the screening committee. I don't recall whether Neil Wilson was there. I remember Walter Scragg spoke out quite often. But I wasn't when Des met with Parmenter and Wilson and whoever else on the Friday afternoon after the consensus statement had been unanimously voted through. I wasn't present. I know a rumour went around that Des had been asked to hand in his credentials, and that upset many of the scholars. I can remember on the Friday night because after the consensus, after the Sanctuary Review Committee, they had a Bible consultation in the same venue, and some of the same people were on both. And on the Friday night, I think was the first night of the Revelation seminar. And I can remember sitting next to Fritz Guy, who had his credentials in his hand to pass into Wilson. But Wilson, very skillful man, he poured, oil on troubled waters and assured everybody that Des hadn't been fired, he hadn't been asked for his credentials and so on. But all that was true in fact, but not in spirit.
The axe was falling, but hadn't fallen.
Well, he had been given an ultimatum that everybody there knew he could not accept.
And when did that ultimatum come? So on the
Friday afternoon.
So that actually in the Glacier View week, it all happened in that week.
Yes.
Wow.
And on that Friday,
so
I forget how it would go. A better source would be Jill Ford because she was present.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we might be able to get Jill to chat to us, see how we go.
But it was along the lines that if you can't accept this, and this, then you should hand in your credentials.
And that would have been in a small meeting with just Neil. Yeah. You know who was in the meeting there? Neil, Des? That's what you're saying. I should ask others that one.
Yeah, I know. Neil was there. Des was there. Parmenter was there. Probably a couple of other vice presidents. I really don't know. That kind of thing is not something that...
So were you all kind of there on the last night of dinner and Des comes out of the headmaster's office and says, sorry, guys, I've lost my job? When did you all know that he had actually not been able to agree with the...
Well, the rumour went around on the Friday, late Friday, that Des had been fired. And this was fairly upsetting to a large number of scholars. And then, as I say, on the Friday evening meeting, sort of a Vespers meeting, which was the inaugurating the next set of meetings on a Revelation kind of seminar, Wilson assured us this is not true. He hadn't been fired. Well, technically that was true. But if you tell somebody this, this, and this, otherwise this.
And that meeting had already happened with just
Yeah,
Des. And, right.
yeah,
Oh.
yes. That happened on the Friday afternoon, and then in the
This was
Friday
Friday
evening
night. So
meeting.
he reassured everyone that night.
Yeah.
And
And
that was the end of
I
the
had,
weekend, the Friday night?
yes. Far as Glacier View is concerned, yes.
Did you speak to Des that night?
No,
Did you speak to him after he'd had the meeting with
not that I can recall.
Parmenter?
I don't think so.
Did you get a chance to talk to Neil or Parmenter again after he had asked you to do
Well,
the 10-point statement to join that?
well, I could have talked to Neil Wilson if I'd wanted to, I suppose, but I don't remember going and talking
No,
to
there was
him.
no kind of conversation happening afterwards.
No,
No.
I wasn't, I was a junior lecturer.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the same ballpark as, the president of the
Yeah.
general conference. I would have been a bit, the first time I'd been to USA, the first time I'd met these scholars like Fritz Guy and Ivan Blaze and Jim Cox, I'd never met them.
Would have been exciting as well.
That part was the only plus I can think of.
Yeah.
From the meeting.
So you then kind of hopped on your plane soon after, headed home.
Yeah. Now I flew back with Parmenter.
Wow.
So I would have.
What, in the sitting next to each other?
Yeah. There was no COVID-19 then.
with Keith Parmenter.
Yeah. And
what did you talk about for 15 hours?
I think he slept. I think he took a pill or something. But we did talk, and I felt sorry for him, actually, because he told, he could see he was absolutely dreading coming back to Australia.
Really?
Because he had the job of trying to hold together a church that was going to,
Erupt.
be at war. And he just feared the situation. That's the impression I got as I talked to him.
He'd kind of caused it a little bit, though. Well, not have caused it. I don't mean that in a bad way. He'd been a player in having that outcome occur. But in his defence, there were people, the concerned brethren, putting pressure on him. People wanted their church back. We've talked about these kind of the two churches in one.
Well, there's no doubt about that.
I think he was genuinely trying to get his church back.
Look, there was a move to try and get Des into the big evangelistic centre, the New Gallery in London, and I remember Duncan, Eva, and myself meeting up with Des one day during the Glacier View, and putting that to him, and I put it to him. I said, this is a good idea. He didn't have to organise it. They were going to have an organiser. He just had to be the front person, the speaker. And I can remember him saying to me he would be willing to go anywhere, but he said, they would hunt me there. Wherever I go, Norm, they will hunt me. There's no place for me to hide. He said, when I go onto a campground, every tent has already been loaded with literature attacking me as a person in every way possible, and some of it quite scurrilous, I understand. So I think he had sort of come to the end of his tether too, actually. He'd had enough of it. Was my impression. And now you asked something else. There's some other thing. And
I was just talking about, I understand the pressure. I understand that people are genuine on both sides, trying to, they're trying to fight to get their church back, or their perception of their church.
Yeah.
The progressive Adventists, the new theology, the excitement of the gospel, the freedom that perhaps questions on doctrine, the release allowed people to kind of explore a bit more. And then the other group that went, hang on, we didn't agree with the release of that book, Andreessen and these guys, and out of that grows the Concerned Brethren and a movement. But I'm saying that people on both sides are kind of have a birthright with Adventism, and they kind of fought hard to keep the Adventism that was theirs. So I can understand, I can have empathy with both sides in that regard.
Yeah.
Bring in politics, power and money, and it kind of shifts everything. But
yeah, I mean, any conflict is never pretty.
No.
And, you know, I mean, I know that dear old Athol Tolhurst had in mind that I would be next, I understand. But when he retired from the Barrel area of the Southern Highlands and built a house here in Currambong, he was living in the village, in the retirement village, while they were building the house. And it was in Alton Road, at the top end of Alton Road. And he and Linley used to walk down every morning to look at the house. It took them forever, this company, to build the thing. And I won't name the company, but I would never use them after what Ethel went through. And we got walking with them, you know, we'd sometimes meet several, and then we'd stand outside their house in its rudimentary form as a brick went up, brick by brick, and chat with the pair of them. And we got quite friendly. I think he discovered, oh, Norm doesn't actually have any horns and no tail, and he doesn't wear a red suit. And I actually invited him home for Sabbath lunch. With Carmel and Ray Roundfeld joined us. Now he is a fantastic guy, or was, most pleasant. And as I said to Liz, it's not his fault that he was brought up in an ultra-conservative missionary's home. And, you know, there was just a spirit of acceptance, and we both knew what areas not to go on to. We knew where the landmines were, and so we didn't talk about them.
So you didn't discuss any of that?
We didn't discuss Glacier View or 1840. But we did share our love of the Lord and our commitment to the church. And by church, I mean community, not structure. And yeah, we had a lovely Sabbath meal together. Just before he went off to, where was it? Tonga, I think. Tonga, I think that's where he grew up, or was born and bred. He said to me, Norm, we must have you and Liz home for lunch. And I said, oh, no, we don't invite people home on a quid pro quo basis. You don't have to invite us back. He said, no, you don't understand. We want to. We want to. So we had become quite friendly, and I think we'd buried the hatchet, not in my skull. And unfortunately, he died on that trip to Tonga. And I can honestly say I genuinely grieved at the news that he had died. So there was not agreement in theology between us, but there was a respect of each other as a person. And my wife, who was slower to forgive him, finally did. I said, because we had a call to Andrews and Athol, who was at Washington, D.C. at the time, rang through to the chair of Andrews and said, no, not that guy, don't call him. And he wasn't on the committee that called me, but he had an input into it. And so it was stopped. And now my wife didn't want to go to USA. So I said, well, you've got your will through. She was still angry. I said, boy, you were hard to please. I said, you're praying to the Lord not to go to the States, and when he does what you pray for, you're angry. She says, well, I wanted it to be our decision, not somebody else's.
I agree with Liz.
And so she was very irate with Ethel. But when she had him home for a meal and saw what a good man, good Christian, decent, good-humoured, pleasant guy that he was, she forgave him. And I had never actually held anything against him. I said, Liz, I've sat on committees and they bring names to them. And I've said, no, not him. So I said, that's all he did. I said, no, he's not the man for the position.
Good job. I do remember you and Arthur Patrick kind of were often in the firing line of people.
Yeah, I probably deservedly, Arthur wasn't. I've made the statement that the only one in Australia now I'm thinking of in my circle, I guess, Bob Park would be another one that you could think of. But I said there are not too many people who can think back through the whole era of Glacier View and post-Glacier View without feeling that we could have done that better. Yeah. I said the exception, is Arthur Patrick. Right. Arthur Patrick could not have done more than he did. And he did it ethically, he did it above board, and just Arthur Patrick. He was a special man.
Incredible man. Greatly missed.
Yes, indeed.
I'm hoping to invite Joan on the to be interviewed on the podcast.
Okay.
I'd love to hear some of her reflections.
Yeah. Another one just popped into my head that I got to know. He was on the same group as mine, group number 4, and that was Larry Geraghty. I knew, with people like that, Heppenstall was on it, and Geraghty, that I was in the presence of very great Adventists, fine scholars. And, coming from a backwater like Australia, it was, that was the only plus I can think of. I wish we were together at a congress on more positive grounds.
I think that's the great tragedy. And when I was chatting to John Godfrey last night, in the interview I did with him, he said, just, imagine there were so many other creative ways they could have handled it. And it had ended in a positive kind of scenario. And if that had happened, imagine what Adventism would look like today, where you would be able to go to conventions and have these scholarly discussions and theological forums without fear of recrimination or job loss. I think it would have been an absolutely amazing Adventism to be a part of, and in many ways, because I kind of was born in New Guinea, but very much lived in Kurrambong on and off as Mum and Dad travelled around from New Zealand back to Kurrambong, to Fiji, back to Kurrambong. There was and very much a part of the Avondale College community. I was very lucky because I kind of got to grow up in that kind of Adventism, where we could literally have a Sabbath lunch with relatives that were very conservative, but just know that we loved each other. And like your story of getting together with Ethel and over lunch.
I think John Godfrey's absolutely right. There could have been much better ways of doing it than the way that Neil Wilson chose. Somebody did say to me, David Larson, I think it was, who said that Wilson liked the big show, and Glacier View tended to be the big show. I think it could have been done at a smaller level. Some of the things that Des wanted, he wanted to be on a committee looking at some of these issues, and that never happened. Des, of course, got very upset with Parmenter because Parmenter tried to renegotiate the deal. I always felt that that was a bit harsh because, you know, the adage of the white goods firm, you know, Bing Lee, used to have the slogan, "All things are negotiable." Remember that?
Yes.
And I thought, you know, Des had been sent off to America for 2 years. It put the fish into a bigger bowl, and it might tame him a bit. But instead, all that meant was Des worked harder. He was flying all over America, taking meetings, and, you know, making a bigger impact, a bigger splash than backing out of the little backwater. The 2 years was up, and it was time to come back, and the deal was he'd come back as the head of the theology department at Avondale. And our friend Parmenter thought, man alive, he hasn't been tamed. He's more wild ex-America than he was before he went there. It didn't work. And so he thought, we've got to renegotiate. All things are negotiable. So he goes first to Castle, the president of PUC, ostensibly Des's employer, I suppose, and said to Castle, would you be prepared to keep Des on your campus as a professor, you know, for longer? And, you know, putting the inevitable off, I suppose, because he wasn't going to calm down because he was there for another year or two. But at least it gives Parmenter time to retire, I suppose. And he had to go to Castle to find out if that was something that he would agree to before he went to Des. Go to the easy one first. And if he said, no, we won't want him any longer, then there was no point in going to Des. But he got a yes from Castle, so then he went to Des and said, maybe you need to think about going into the field when you come back instead of going to Avondale. And Des just went ballistic. But the deal was, a deal is a deal. And poor old Palmer's trying to say all deals are negotiable.
Right.
But you've
just going to bring Gillian in, and Gillian, welcome back. I know you had to leave for a little bit there. I knew, as he said the word ballistic, that you would be putting your hand up soon to correct that observation. And those watching, and Gillian, if you get afterwards, go back and watch from 2.5 hours on. I'd forgotten how in depth Norm had gone into the 10-point statement. He reads them out. He reads everyone that's on the list. He talks about his regret for saying a couple of things. So anyway, I'm just saying that for later, if you get a chance, and we can have another program later where you reflect on from 2.5 hours into this show. This is, but those listening on the podcast, because we, as of today, are going live. Are going back into the podcast, not just YouTube and Facebook. If you're hearing this voice, it's Peter from 2025 and Gillian live here, 2025. We're listening back to a 2020 interview reflecting on Glacier View with Dr. Norm Young. Share us your thoughts there, Gillian.
Well, one thought, because I just came back in when he was talking about Athol. You know, there was an issue. Bob, I'll try and do this briefly, but Bob Parr was editor of The Record, and pretty much everybody loved him. And Des's friends like Eric Magnuson and Bob Parmenter wanted them out. You know, it sort of relates to what Norman last said. It wasn't quite the way Norman presented, but I'll get back to that afterwards. Now, what was I going to say about Athol? One thing with you know, Bob Parr was taken out of the record. That was part of getting Des's friends out. I could go into that in more detail. And he became the Sydney Conference president, which was a real blessing because he saved many of the ministers. You remember that Athol particularly went round and
Purged
all the young people, a lot of them. And when it came to voting Bob in again, he didn't make it as president. And Fern Parr told me, actually, when she was talking about something else important, but I won't get into that, because Fern was a secretary, and the old-time secretaries were very closed-mouthed about confidentiality. But I was talking to her one day with Dorothy Hogan, so that tells you Dorothy's been gone for quite a while.
Lovely.
Oh, there's my trap. Oh, they remained in the room while everybody went out for some reason, and they decided that they would count the vote. And Bob actually won that election.
Wow. Didn't know that.
So Athol had misrepresented it and got him out.
Wow.
So Athol was not squeaky clean. He might have put on a good front and everything. And Bob Parr said to Fern, "This doesn't leave the room." But she told me, which wasn't very safe, was it? Because I'm telling you. So I could say a lot more about anyway, so we're talking about that.
And also about the ballistic thing, yeah.
I
can imagine him being indignant, frustrated, annoyed, but not ballistic. I've never ever seen Des like that.
Look, when I used to come back to Australia, because my mother was still alive then, and my parents were still alive, so I used to come and see them about every year or every 18 months. And I'd come through, I'd take Mum for trips, and we'd go and stay with Ali and Sherry. I've got to keep focused on this, what Norman was saying, that Des went ballistic.
Yeah, what was that about? I can't remember. I can't wind it back either, unfortunately.
No, I'll think of it in a minute. It's just that I've got a lot going on in my head. There's a whole history behind when Glacier View happened. I had a lot of interaction with Norman. Every time I came back on those trips, I would talk to Norman. Now, I believe that you go to the person and talk to them about it. It wasn't that I was bad-mouthing him to everybody, but he had written a letter to Des after Glacier View, and actually that's a letter that we don't have. I don't know why. And he's talking about this episode that he mentioned where Des went ballistic. Now, he wasn't clear about which letter it was, and I presume he was talking about correspondence or conversations during Glacier View, and I couldn't identify what he was talking about. So I thought it wasn't unfair. And so every time I came over, Norm and I would have it out. And Liz was not happy with me at all. But I did go to him and talk to him about it. It wasn't that I was ruining his reputation everywhere. And I am over it now, particularly since when I heard this talk for the first time, I understood what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about Glacier View. He was talking about a letter that was written in 1978. And he does tell the story about it. But I thought he was talking about a letter that was written at Glacier View. And I thought that it was misrepresenting what happened. So I won't tell you the whole story. Sometime I can talk to you about it, because there's a series of things. You have to understand that this whole thing with Des was planned before the Glacier View event. And
I tell you what, if you get a chance to watch again from 2.5 hours into this, there's a moment that is very clear that Norm suggests that what you've always said is true. And I didn't pick up on it when I first interviewed him, but watching it back now, my mind blew, because he confirms that this was very much a pre-planned event. And it was the Wednesday morning that that Neil Wilson came up to him to get him to be involved, and he unpacks the 10-point like a dream. I highly recommend watch it back. And in 2 weeks' time, I'm replaying the John Rosier interview. It'd be great to have you and John on that. And then when we get to that point where he talks about the 10-point as well, if you've watched this in the meantime, I'd love your thoughts on it. And another quick thing, we'll have to go back to the show, but another quick thing, and we'll talk a little bit after as well. He and I just a few minutes ago talked about you and how be good to get you on the program. And I know it was this interview that you contacted me afterwards and said, oh, actually, here's someone you can interview, and you put me on to John Rosier, and then you got involved, and then later you came on the show. So it was interesting to hear us plan that, and then it actually happened. So,
but if you just to say that if you understand, you'll have to remember that I can give you the whole history. That Glacier View was pre-planned, and a lot of that was covered up.
Yes,
just one for instance, George Burnside, one of his relatives, told me that he was in hospital 3 weeks before everybody left for Glacier View. His uncle George Burnside told him this, and Parmenter came in and was talking to Burnside, and he told him Des would not survive the Glacier View week.
Yeah.
And Athol also said this. He actually said it to the workers, but he said it to I've got to be careful whose names I mention. I put a lot of this stuff in with a hold on it. People don't want to own up to it yet. But the son of somebody at the division asked Athol, have you read the manuscript? Now, his son, when he came on, said that his father said that he had. But we heard that he hadn't, that he actually went around, because there wasn't a lot of time. Anyway, I won't get off on sidetrack with that. No. But he said to this administrator, he said, the administrator said to him, have you read the manuscript? And he said, no. And he said, he's gone. And the guy said, what did you say? And he said, Des, he said, you won't survive the Glacier View week. So that's a very brief statement that it was pre-planned, and they covered all that covering up. Now, the letter that Norman is talking about was November the 2nd, we received it in the States in 1978. So it's 2 years before Glacier View, almost 2 years. And what has happened is Parmenter has come over. He's talked to Jack Castle, because the next day I go to see Jack Castle and I ask him about it. And whereas Parmenter had told the workers that Castle asked him to keep Des, Castle told me a different story. He said that Parmenter asked him to keep Des. So what happens is, this is about October the 18th, 1978, because I've had to go over and get all the dates straight and everything, because it's a lot to get it clear. So I go in to see Castle, so I know the story. Now, at this time, the annual council was on when he asked Castle, was about the 8th to the 18th or something. So shortly afterwards, Jack Castle came back, and Jill, who's never done anything like this before, turns up at the office and sits and waits to talk to him, because we'd already heard by phone, the middle of October, that Des was not going back. So he said, yes, Parmenter asked to keep us. So we knew it was a fact that we hadn't been officially told. And then November the 2nd, two or 3 weeks later, we get a letter from Parmenter. It's a 2 or 3 page letter, and the first 2 pages are all of Des's bad deeds, what the Brinsmeads are saying, etc. And then on the 3rd page, just before he signs off, he said, by the way, he said, you won't be coming back to Australia, because there were 3 people. Des said, I only want to go for 2 years, and then I want to come back. And he was promised by Duncan Eva. Anyway, I'm nearly done, in case you're worried.
No, that's just exactly what Norm was talking about, that he saw that promise as a negotiable one. Not Norm, but the...
Or Des didn't see it as negotiable at all,
No,
because
that's right.
it's what
He's
was done
saying that
behind his back.
He's saying that
Because
Parmenter saw it as a negotiable.
yeah, and there's a bigger story behind it, which we can talk about one day, where they had a Bible conference, and that took me a bit of working out. 6 weeks after Parmenter went back, in December of 1978, they called in all these Americans, Gerhard Hausel, the big names, and they had a meeting, and the purpose of the meeting was to get the affection for Des out of the mind of the workers. And so they want to show, here's all our wonderful American scholars. And it's quite funny, because Bob Parr writes a letter, and it's absolutely hilarious when he said how boring it was.
Wow.
So Parmenter writes the letter and says how wonderful it is. But this was the idea. It was all planned to get.
Oh, yeah. And I can't
see,
wait
Des knew this.
Yeah. I can't
but-
wait for you to see what Norm was just saying earlier. And also, I can't wait to get to the Lyndon Rogers interview, which I thought was in a few weeks, but it's actually interview number 25, I think. So it'll be a bit
Well,
longer away.
Linda's was excellent. Everything Linda does is excellent. And I was, actually hearing Norman say this, and then twigging from his talk when he was doing this actual interview that he wasn't talking about Glacier View and Des getting rattled. He was talking about 1978, 2 years before. Once I realized that,
yes, the renegotiation,
I got what he was talking about.
Yes.
Because he seemed, he was on the plane from Colorado for the first step with Parmenter sitting next to him, and Parmenter sort of was crying on Norman's shoulder, and Norman felt sorry for him. But
he flew home from there as well to Sydney.
So then when he writes the stiff letter to Des, it upset me because of what we'd been through. And I thought, it took me years to get over it. But as soon as I heard Norman on this, I understood what he was actually saying. And anyway, that 1978 letter, which is in my books, isn't that bad.
Yeah,
It isn't, I was with Des when he got that letter. I know what he was like. He was not furious, but he did think it was breaking the principle. Now, when you broke a principle in front of Des, then he'd give you a talking to. But he wasn't ballistic.
No.
You should meet his brother if you want to see ballistic.
Hey, quick question that's just come through. We're in 2025 here. Those that are listening on the podcast, we're having a reflection of 2020. And MC writes, Gillian, what was the name of the lady there in Angwin that invited both Roy and Des to a Christmas meal every year?
Greta Hartelius. And Thanksgiving, we used to get over there and treated sumptuously. She was fabulous. So the Gaines, who actually lived in her apartment, were students.
Right.
Roy Gain was going down to Berkeley. So actually, we were very good friends. Quite different, but the relationship between Des and Roy's father was completely different. And Roy's been to our home in Australia and visited us. It's hard for people to understand, but you can have different viewpoints and you can get on.
Yeah, which is how he was able to get on with Athol as well. So there's all sorts of backstories.
And of course, this lady was a Dane, and she'd have Nils Erik Andreasen come. So we regularly met up with them on these festive occasions. Yeah.
And MC just wrote, Greta, now I remember, because I don't know if he wants me to say his name, but he's related, I think, to Roy in some way. You can share that if you're watching, MC. And just quickly before we go back to the looking back, Andy Mack writes, Gillian, I'm so sorry that you went through this. You were in my thoughts and prayers. It wasn't right.
Well, we sort of knew what was going on, except about the John Brinsmead thing. But, what a provenance. Somebody on the floor at Glacier View in the early days came up and told me about John Brinsmead. Otherwise, I'd never have known about it. And seeing on their part, John is worried because Bob has come out against 1844. He doesn't agree with him. He was always critical of Des because our son Paul stayed with John. I've never faced John with this, but I've talked to Bob a couple of times and he's actually written it down. It definitely happened that he went down to the division starting in spring 1978. We've got a letter where Parmenter says that a Brinsmead family member came down and he told him all this stuff. But because they never came out and clearly told us what was going on, we just laughed it off because it just wasn't true. We weren't in cahoots with Bob, but we were friendly with him because, look, in many ways, he was more sincere. He did a huge switch. He's a very traditional perfectionist in the 60s. He switches over to the gospel because he reads Luther. Desert's been saying, go and read Luther. And when he goes to interview the Pope, well, the Pope's coming to visit, so he interviews a Catholic priest around 1970, and he realizes that Adventists teach the Catholic gospel. So he does the big switch around to the gospel, but then he goes liberal in the early 80s and goes through the moral influence thing, which is what our friend is presenting, you know, our friend over in America. I can't see his name now, but the idea is he's putting up moral influence stuff. So he becomes more liberal.
Is that
Moto Sapien? The pathway is, I call it going down the gurgler. I've been trying to do a diagram for volume 9 where you go from the perfectionist traditional side, you stop at hover over the gospel for a while, and then you go liberal, moral influence theory, Loma Linda, where you're against justification by faith, and then a lot of people go out. And I've done a drawing of it going down the sink. I've got a photo of that, and I've tried to put these because I see my role as an explainer, trying to explain these different views, and you know, anyway.
MC writes back, he is Connie's brother. And is Roy's wife Connie?
Oh, yes. Hello, Connie's brother.
I'm not sure if he's saying who he is. I know.
Yeah, I know he is. I can't think of Connie's name, but her family were very conservative. You know.
Now, we're going to get back to the 2020 interview there with Dr. Norm Young. Enjoy. Here we go.
Gone behind my back and gone to Castle. Well, he had to go to somebody first. Yeah. And he thought the easiest one is going to be Castle. If it's no, then we don't have to do it. He can't go any further. If he says yes, at least we can approach Des with a proposal. I didn't think it was evil. Then he went to Des with the proposal and it blew up in his face.
So you've highlighted a couple of things there where you think Des could have kind of traversed the kind of landscape a bit better. What do you think he actually did wrong at the Glacier View?
Oh boy, I have no idea. I think his position paper was well written, well researched, well argued. In places, I think, irrefutable. We've seen, I've read some of the efforts to refute. One of the first papers I read at a workers' meeting in Sydney, immediately after Glacier View, was called Rifle Shot or Shotgun. The shotgun is a scatter shot. A rifle is a more direct shot, a single shot. We fired in the October ministry special, we fired a shotgun, a scatter shot, and an awful lot of innocent bystanders got hit. In other words, in their zeal to refute Des, they didn't check. And so even the Bible commentary could be quoted in support of what Des has said. So if you hit Des on that point, then you're hitting the Bible commentary on that point as well. Neufeld and some of these kind of people who had written on things. And so I just tabulated all the ones who were wounded in the scatter fire that they fired, anything as long as it hits Des. So I don't want to fault Des. I mean, he didn't set up Glacier View. He couldn't have stopped what happened with the forum. The reason why the forum became such a trigger was because it was recorded, and the little cassettes went around the world like autumn leaves, I can assure you. I was listening to it not that long after it back here in Australia. And when Parmenter asked him to try and stop it, he said, you know, I know I'm not sending them out, which is true. I think it was Brinsmead's crowd that was sending them out. But he could have at least appeared to be cooperative, I suppose, and said, I'll ring Bob and tell him to stop it.
Yeah.
But, you know, these are picadillos. These are nothings.
Yeah, it is what it is. It happened the way it happened.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Des claimed that everything he said and did was beyond reproach.
No.
He was operating under extreme pressure and attack. I think the amazing thing is that Des never appeared to lose his temper. He always seemed to treat people who didn't deserve it courteously. He seemed to have a high regard for the Standish brothers.
Yeah.
One of whom is lamented.
I think they both are now.
Okay. Well, their attack, I think, was unchristian. But Des was always spoke kindly of them, you know. So to some degree, I'm amazed at how well did that. I can think of some picadillos that I think may have been better. Was really outweighed by the fact that how he conducted himself through the whole of it.
If people that are listening to the podcast, when it comes out down the track, if they listen to episode 3, I did the first 3 episodes of an interview I did with Des not too long before he passed, and the third episode, a little way through, I said, just share with us what the gospel means to you. And he just did it in the space of about 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And Jill was in the background. And when he finished, it was like just goosebumps. We were quiet, and I thought, wow, this guy's here in the very twilight of his life, but he's lived this gospel. And the fruits of his love for Christ and the gospel were born, and were shining brightly even at that late stage in his life. Yeah. And I think
well, Des was. I think Des would have died the way he lived, by faith. And certainly Arthur Patrick did. I mean, I remember visiting Arthur Patrick just before he died. He was asleep. And I sat in the chair next to him, reading a book, and he woke up and saw that I was reading a book. He said, "What book are you reading?" I said, "Oh, it's a history of the American Civil War." "Oh, why are you reading that?" I said, "Because we've just seen the film Abraham Lincoln." And I said there were spots in it where I missed the point because I just didn't have the background. And so I'm reading the background, having now seen the film. And he says, "Oh, Joan and I were going to see that." He says, "Was it good?" I said, "It was excellent." And, you know, here he is knowing that he's going to die, and he knew he's going to die soon, but he's chatting and interested in one other thing. And then he said to me, "Let us... what are you working on?" I said, "I'm working on John's Gospel at the moment. I wrote a manuscript, and nobody wants to publish it, but I wrote a manuscript." And he said, "Let's walk together through the chapters of John. And so here he is lying in his, palliative care bed, really. And we walked through together, chapter by chapter, the 21 chapters of John's Gospel. And, the impression that had on me, that Arthur was going to die the way he lived, loving the Lord, full of faith.
What kind of things would you like to leave with people, thoughts, before we sign off? What kind of hope can you offer for young people that are coming up? What kind of things would you like to leave with us?
I think the young people give us the hope. When I came back from Glacier View and took a forum here at college and some other workers' meetings and that, the thing that the young people at college wanted to know was Des treated fairly, and was love at the center of it all. That's what they wanted to know, was love at the center of it all. And so I think our young people have got a greater sense of the love of God than most of us had at their age. So I think that they are our hope for sure. I would probably say something like this, and if you had to ask me that question, I could have thought about it, but this is just coming off the cuff. At the moment, there's a bit of tension between Australia and China because Australia feels it's important that we trace the cause of how we handle this virus once it jumped across from the animal kingdom into human and has caused a worldwide anguish, which is far from finished. We're going to hit 5 million infections very soon, and probably, about 300,000 deceased. And as the mayor of New York keeps reminding us, even though the numbers are going down, every one of these represents a family, loved one, grandchildren, etc. Every death is a tragedy, many of them unnecessary. So we want to do this retracing the steps to find out how it did that jump, where it did the jump, how it could have been better handled, how it went from China very quickly to Hong Kong and through the world. Can we learn? Let's review. Let's do a review. I would say, let us, if we're going to review Glacier View, let us do a review and ask ourselves, not to try and say this is the right view and this is the wrong view, but and which China thinks everybody's going to try and blame China, which USA seems to be trying to do, but that's Trump. And although it ill behoves me to comment on somebody else's leader, we have to discount some of what's happening in America by their leader. But we can learn from that lesson, or the attempt to learn from that lesson of this coronavirus, or SARS-2 or whatever, COVID-19. How did it get such a hold? How did it move so quickly? Where did it originate? Not to blame somebody, but so we can all learn from it and try and prevent it happening again. Let us review Glacier View to see how we can do it better. If such a thing arises again, and it will, as long as we keep hanging on to October 22, 1844, Jesus moving from this work to that work, even if we qualify it by not calling it rooms or compartments, but calling it phases, you've still got Jesus doing something post 1844 in the heavenly sanctuary that he wasn't doing prior to 1844. Let us review when that rises again. How are we going to handle it? What are we going to focus on? Will we lose Christ? Will it be like 1888, that shemozzle, where Ellen White counseled us to need to go back to the school of Christ and learn of him and then come back and talk about things? Let's get the perspective of what Christianity is all about. Like I learned in Daniel and Revelation class and shared with my former business partner, and he dropped the topic forever, and that the center is Christ and him crucified. And the love and mercy of God that is revealed in sparing not his son, but giving him up for us all. I'm crucified with Christ, Paul said. I no longer live. And the life you can see me living in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. My wife asked me yesterday, if I had one text of the Bible, which text would it be? Well, I have a number of favorites. Ephesians 4:32 and its parallel in Colossians 3:13 are favorites. But in the end, I said Galatians 2:20. And she said to me, why Galatians 2:20? I said, because the usual answer, John 3:16, is the world. God so loved the world. And that is rather impersonal. But Galatians 2:20 is who loved me and gave himself for me. And that just personalizes it. And so we need, armed with those kind of texts. The other favorite text, Ephesians 4:32, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. So we need to approach these kind of tensions with that kind of love, care, and to be able to listen as well as to speak. That's hard for me. I'm paid to talk and I do it very readily. But we need to listen to each other. I mean, maybe the concerned brethren aren't 100% wrong. You know, they want us to take seriously our life in Christ. I think they're wrong because they move towards perfectionism. But they want, their practical point is of the perfectionist is, if we are told we cannot get victory over all sin, then we won't try. That's what they say. We won't try. If we can't believe it's achievable, we won't try. I don't try to run the 4-minute mile because I know it's not achievable for me. I do well to walk the 6-minute 100 yards or meters. But they've missed the point, haven't they? The love of Christ constrains me, 2 Corinthians 5:14. That's why we continue, not because we think it's achievable. I'm trying to be the best husband I can to a beautiful wife. Am I perfect? Well, go and ask her. I don't want to Skype. Go and ask her. And she will almost certainly, he's not a bad bloke, but he ain't perfect. I'm trying to be the best morphar, grandfather I can be for beautiful grandchildren, a gift from God in the old age. Grandchildren are the plus of old age, plus $2.50 on the train. But am I perfect? No. So what keeps me trying to be those things? I love my grandchildren. I love my wife. That's why. The love of Christ constrains us. That's why we try and do the impossible, to always please him. But when we don't please him, we need to confess it, but not kill ourselves over it. So it seems to me. So the message I would give to young people would be, focus your life on Christ. Des Ford used to say, how to overcome your faults? The expulsive power of a greater, he would rattle this off without a hesitation, of a greater affection, the expulsive power of a greater affection. Put Christ first in your life. Love him totally and committed to him, and that the expulsive power of a greater affection. And live your life in Christ. And when you come to a conflict, which will happen for sure sooner or later, deal with it in a way that is creative, that is Christian, and is seeking reconciliation. You know, leave your gift at the altar and go and try and make it right with your brother. While you're on the way, before you even come into judgment, try and settle out of court. Are some of the parables Jesus gives. To solve problems as early as we can and love one another. This is the great commandment, isn't it? To love one another as I have loved you. Wash one another's feet. Play the servant role to the other, the slave role to the other. For Jesus did that and left us an example. So I would tell the young people to love one another. And love in the New Testament is an active noun. It's how you treat the other, not just an emotion in the heart. And love the neighbor as though you were loving yourself. And neighbor here doesn't just mean somebody who lives next door. It means everyone you meet. Try and treat them with the love of God. And if you say, boy, that's a big ask, it is. But it is the only way. It is the only way. Love is the only way. Yeah. An active love for the other, a doing, not just a feeling, a doing.
Love is a verb.
If the love is a verb, says beautifully what I'm trying to say. I should interview you.
It'd be a short interview.
I'm sure it wouldn't. You could explain to your audience what a what was it?
The pentatonic scale.
The pentatonic scale.
I want to get my PhD in the pentatonic scale.
Yes. My wife says she would like to have a PhD, and I said, why? And she said, so that people will respect me. And I said, oh my giddy aunt. I said, don't respect PhDs. I said, that's just people who've focused for 4 years of their life on so focused that they end up knowing everything about nothing. They focus down until they know everything about nothing. Yeah. So PhDs are a joke. No, I said, it's a person. You respect a person, not a doctrine.
Norm, thank you very much for taking this time for us. It is
all the best, Peter, and all the best with your PhD.
But on the 5 main notes.
We won't respect you anymore, but nor will we respect you any less.
The conversation will be ongoing in the comments.
Have we got anybody still listening to us? Because we've been talking here. It seems to be
over 30 people have hung around the whole time.
Oh, God bless them.
So we've had a great chat, and it feels like we've just scratched the surface.
They could have read half the books on the shelf here, couldn't they? That time. Let me see. What can I see that was recommended?
And I noticed that you're not really a Facebook kind of person, but if you change your mind, jump into Liz's account and join SDAQ&A and come and wade into some of the comments. I'm looking to my right here. I've finally gotten organised and a little bit more technical, and I can see many comments that people have put there. So you might want to respond, or you might not want to.
My wife has a Facebook account, but I think she just receives them, and she might do a comment or a thumbs up, like, Sometimes you say, oh, have a look at this, and I'll read on Facebook. But no, I've never joined. And my son is in IT, and he refuses to have anything to do with Facebook.
Wow.
He reckons they are a scurrilous firm. He said, how do you think, ages ago when he warned me, don't join Facebook, Dad. He said, how do you think they make money? I said, I have no idea. He said, they sell your name.
They sell your information.
They sell their database to anybody who will buy it.
Mm.
And he said, if you don't cherish your privacy, then you have joined Facebook.
Yeah.
That's how they make their money. And I think he's paranoid, mind you, but
yeah, I've got nothing to hide, so I don't care. What are they going to do? Oh, he likes to buy guitars. And look, well, we're going to leave it there, but you're welcome to join in with Liz and read some of the comments and get involved or not. Just let it go out there.
That'll be discouraging, I'm sure.
It'll hover out there for a bit longer.
We were going to talk about my wife's long stitch or whatever it is on the wall behind me.
Oh, yes, behind you.
Yes.
Let's close with a little, because it was quite relevant in many ways to the topic, and it's just been hovering there in the background.
All those who are still there, we'll give you the question. What biblical story, New Testament biblical story, so we'll narrow it down a bit, is represented by this stitching?
Well, it's very hard to see the stitching in the video.
I can see it very clear on mine.
There's 10 subjects.
Yeah, you can't see all 10 of them. I can only see 8 of them. But there are 2 more.
I can see 10.
Oh, you can see the 10. Yeah. I can see it very clearly, but only 8 of them. And it is the 10 maidens with their lamps, a somewhat modern version. They're not terracotta lamps. And they're not olive oil with a bit of a wick either. They are more Swedish, 18th century lamps, I think, and Swedish beauties as well, not Jewish. And one of them has 10 of them have their lamps lit and 10 have gone out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that wonderful, which is a big parable, of course, in our history. The way
5 were ready.
Behold, the bridegroom cometh.
5 were ready for the judgment and 5 weren't.
Yeah, but more than that, behold, the bridegroom cometh was a catch cry of particularly the 7th month movement. In a way, to understand 1844, you need to know denominational history.
Yeah.
You need to understand what the bridegroom cometh, why they got excited about that, what it meant, how they reinterpreted it. How did they get October 22? Because Miller just had the 21st of March to the 21st of March 44, so 43. There's a spring of northern spring of March 21, 43.
Wasn't it actually in the Day of Atonement that year was actually September 27, wasn't it? Not October 22.
Oh, I don't know, but Miller never preached that.
No.
He didn't come on board until later. That was a guy called S.S. Snow got that going and wrote up the True Midnight Cry. And you can get that online. And he argued from the autumn feasts. And so he got that date of the 22nd using the Karaite Jewish calendar. But I understand that even the Karaite Jewish calendar doesn't actually give you October 22. No. But be that as it may, we're starting up again, aren't we?
Do you know what? SDAQ&A is not going away. We're not going to we've already done about 21 episodes, and this is just a little series that is focusing on Glacier View. So as soon as this series is finished, I want to be chatting to you again, because I think we could do a couple of episodes just on that topic.
Yeah, well, maybe John's Gospel, because I can't get it published.
Yeah, well, SDAQ&A could be your publisher.
Yes, that's a thought, isn't it? That's a thought. They're very modern. And I hope also you've told Peter, I hope you've told them that Zoom is something fairly new on the Australian horizon, as far as I know. The coronavirus has made
I know
Zoom absolutely Zoom.
I wish I'd bought Zoom shares 3 months ago.
Oh, okay.
Before Christmas.
Yeah. Well, the thing I'm proud of is that I managed to get onto it so readily and easily. You didn't say any words.
And I was
How
impressed.
proud you were.
I was impressed
And
that I sent you a link, and I was expecting a phone call with you saying, I cannot watch that button, I can't get on. And literally up you popped on the screen.
I expected that too. But no, I read the text and understood it and hit the right buttons. And of course, I'm accustomed to using a mouse on my ancient laptop. And I had to keep remembering, oh, Joan Patrick has just sent a hello, lovely ladies. No, that's not for me.
She sent that to Liz. We're going to pause it there.
Yeah.
I absolutely love chatting with you. And I know, judging from a few comments, I can see people have really valued your contribution. And I'm hoping that for years to come, people can delve into these podcasts and analyze them to death and come up with all sorts of
You're a good man doing it. And those poor people out of America.
Hopefully it's a valuable resource.
What time was it in the States when we started? We started at 2 p.m. here.
I don't know. And when I spoke to Bill the other day, it was 11:30 here and about 6:30 there at night, 11:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m.
Yeah, and probably a different day.
The day before.
Yeah.
On this coming Monday,
forgive us, you people in the USA. We just talked on and on.
With on Monday or Tuesday, I'm having a very interesting interview as part of this series with a guy called Ken Samples, who was Walter Ray's kind of protege.
Wow.
We're chatting. So it'll be, I think, 10:30. I haven't announced this anywhere yet. This is hot off the press. It'll be Monday or Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. A chat with this guy, Ken Sampler, who was.
Send me an email.
Not Walter Ray, Walter Martin.
Oh, Walter Martin.
Walter Martin. I said Walter Ray by mistake. Walter Martin.
You did say Walter Ray.
Yeah.
There is a Walter Ray.
Yes, of course.
And that would have been an interesting conversation too.
I think we're going to have about 5 podcasts by the end of the year with just you and me chatting. We could start a new podcast.
Maybe you need to record it and edit it down.
I am.
For the sake of our poor American brethren.
There'll be a shorter version.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go and feed the dog.
Where do I hit to leave the meeting?
I'll hit the button. Just hang on a second. We say farewell to everybody. Thank you.
And God bless you all. And you did well to stay with it to the end. 82-year-old become garrulous old men. The taciturn is not a word that we ever think of. Prolix is more like it. If you don't know what they mean, look up your dictionary. Prolix rather than taciturn.
See you later, Norm.
If there are any Swedes out there, hej då, lycka till och Gud välsigne dig.
See you later, Norm.
Okay, bye.
Oh, that was funny. I can see why you term my end of shows the long farewells. I haven't got long. I've got to head off in a few minutes, but just wanted to say thank you to Gillian. We're going to share a few thoughts in a moment because I could see your hand and face opening there with surprise a couple of times. So we're going to give it another 10-15 minutes. I just want to say that today's episode is proudly sponsored by Dr. David Thiel. As I do these weekly revisiting season 2 episodes. I'm encouraging people to reach out and sponsor one of the shows. There are many interesting people and guests that I have coming up. You're welcome to align your name with these resources that are going to go out into the world. It's funny just listening there, Gillian, to he and I talking about that being, I think, number 25 or 27 or something in the series. And here we are. But I said, but SDAQ&A will go on. And here we are, over 350 interviews later. And yeah, going stronger than ever. So
that makes you a prophet.
Makes me a prophet. Yeah, well, I predicted Ted Wilson would get back in again, and that came true as well. So I think I don't think I've had any predictions come wrong yet. So just give us a couple of thoughts there in closing on what some things that just came to mind there. I wrote a couple of notes as well.
Well,
but go for it.
Say that again. I thought it was a good talk.
Yeah, it was a really good chat, and
it you know, I told you about that thing when he was talking about Des going ballistic. I mean, I've got the letter, and I don't think it was ballistic at all. But on principle, Des was upset about it because the workers were told about it, and he could have contacted Des. He actually said in the letter that he tried to contact Des when he was in San Diego. He could have talked to me.
Yeah,
but
by the way, this
there's
is
more to it.
It was 2025. Those who are listening on the podcast and can't see us, the interview of 2020 is just finished. This is Gillian and I now, season 13, episode 7, and looking back at Glacier View. So this is us talking, just recapping what we've just listened to. Sorry, carry on there, Gillian. It was interesting that he'd even said he'd never seen Des in any way lose his temper. So I think using the word ballistic might have just been a bit of a throwaway line.
I remember when I first heard this talk, although I've forgotten the details of it, that I thought it was very good.
Absolutely.
And there was a misunderstanding because Norman didn't know everything about the background behind that letter. And because I thought he was talking about letters at Glacier View, and there weren't any letters like that where Des went ballistic.
No,
so that's sorted out.
That cleared that up well and truly.
A huge problem for me, because that's why I was upset with Norman in the years afterwards, because you know, he was supporting, he appeared to be, from this letter he sent us, which I no longer have, appeared to be supporting Parmenter, and it just, as I say, every time I came over here and I had a conversation, and then Liz got upset with me, and I said, well, look, we're just defending our men. I said, that's all it is. I said,
yeah. And he was also saying,
I said, just like you're defending Norman. I said, I'm defending
doing the same.
So
yeah. He also said there in closing that he was talking about that hopefully people could learn from this, and that it would happen again, as long as this topic has not been sufficiently worked through or discussed, and it hasn't been. I would disagree with him there, that in 5 years I've not seen anyone address this still. Hopefully now that we're going live into the general public rather than the private group here on YouTube, that people, and the podcast of course, that people will get a chance to see it and find all about Glacier View and buy your amazing volumes as well. So can we do better?
I don't think that will happen much.
It's a great thing for people to think, yeah, how can we do better? But I personally, another prediction, I don't think the church is going to ever face again this kind of thing. They are at the moment with Conrad Vine and that other guy. Just forgotten his name, but Michigan. But
Ron Kelly.
Yes, Ron Kelly. That's a really interesting, similar kind of thing. They're trying to suppress them, but it's on the other side of the fence. But theologically speaking, I don't think the church is going to face this again. I think they've locked it down. They've confirmed their core DNA is legalism, and I personally, I don't think I don't have the kind of hope that a lot of the gospel Adventists do have. which is fine. It's just my opinion.
Well, I happen to agree with you.
And
Um,
it leaves them in an
there are some
interesting position, because when you criticize or when you highlight that thought that it probably they won't have that opportunity again, and that they're essentially living in false hope, that can seem offensive. And it also means, well, where do they go from now? You know, they don't want to leave, but they're not really having any influence as they stay. So it's just interesting to talk about and to hear what different people think what happens next.
I think one thing that needs to be said is that after Des was put out, he did have a whole lot of ministers who were teaching the gospel. And, you know, Graham Bradford would be one, John Carter, and Peter Roenfeld, who's still going. But of course, that generation, well, Graham's gone.
Yeah, they're
sort of retired. Yeah. But the churches constantly tried to shut down the gospel because, like many 19th century churches, they were more perfectionist, largely because of Wesleyanism. And Wesley was a wonderful man who knew the gospel, but he had an error on sanctification. And even though Ellen White came out about Wesley's perfectionism, it's almost as though she didn't quite get the implications of what that meant. That because she was getting older, that she's still in the 1880s. And, you know, I'm not a great expert on this, so take it with a pinch of salt. She was still saying things that were very perfectionistic, and yet she realized that Wesley had an error. And it always seemed through the years that if people could admit that righteousness by faith included sanctification as well as justification, then you could stay in the church. There's a lot of people who love the gospel, but they could, Norman's one of them actually, that didn't make that distinction. Anyway.
I think that Des, this is just my opinion, was genuinely heralding in an opportunity of a Martin Luther style reformation for the Adventist Church. This is, again, my humble opinion. I could well be wrong, but I felt he was, and yourself as well, you were very entwined with all of this, were actually offering people a chance to, as Bob Wolfgram says, be a revisionist Adventist, where this stuff could be revised in such a way that it could have legs. It could have been a really profound movement for Luther to gain that momentum. Obviously, the Protestant movement was no longer the Catholic Church. I personally think that for the Des Ford, Gillian Ford style gospel, that I think is a really wonderful gem of a message, I don't think it could have worked within the church. And it's a shame that it was kind of just sort of crushed within the Adventist Church. And a lot of the people that would like to have benefited from it were silenced, and in many ways are silenced to this day. And I sometimes sound like I'm criticizing them, but really I'm just encouraging them to shout from the rooftops their unique kind of distinctive Adventism. But I think the world is a better place because of you and Des Ford and what you've offered in your understanding.
I wasn't the innovator. I was just the pack horse.
Yeah, but it was a team. I very much, as I've learned doing these shows, and having seen you both in the real world, it's very much a team. And so anyway, because he said there that the CBs maybe aren't 100% wrong, and I think what he was referring to there was this notion that sometimes the more conservative branch of a church can bring people back into a certain kind of framework that's positive and keeps it balanced. But as I've asserted many times, I don't think the Adventist Church is simply swinging from a conservative to a liberal aspect. I really believe that the theology that you guys breathed into the Adventist Church in the late 70s, and yes, as he pointed out, there are others as well doing the same. I do believe it was a new theology, and it had its roots in Adventism. But I think down the track, people are going to run with the Des Gillian Ford gospel. And I think if we were to live another 100 years, I think you'll find a very healthy movement that springboards from a lot of this content that has been created by yourself and others, because it is so unique. I just can't see, like what you said in the first part of today's chat, that Des persisted with sharing the righteous by faith, the gospel as he saw it, because the church's view of it was undermining the gospel, and that really hit me.
Oh, that was the whole reason for going, because
Yeah. And so I believe that because of that, it can never flourish within Adventism. And as you've said several times in the past, that you guys didn't want to start a new church because of all the things that we know go along with that. But I think there's something there that is so unique and refreshing that I think it still deserves a chance, is what I'm saying, I guess. It deserves a chance.
Now, Doug Hackelman, who most of you won't know, but he did work at Loma Linda, and is writing a triple commentary, books on the Cottrell family, and it's Ray Cottrell, who was at Glacier View and very much supported Des and agreed with him on justification by faith. He wasn't a reformer. He wasn't a great speaker like Des, but a very, very clever man. His father, he was a missionary to China, and then his father, who worked with Ellen White, worked at the Review and Herald, worked with the pioneers. And it's quite a while ago. I'd say it was 2012, could have even been earlier. For some reason, Doug, who wrote Adventist Currents, you can actually find this online and look at he's an excellent writer. Is it all right to talk about Doug? Because he's important.
100%.
Very good thinker, very good writer. And in the 70s and 80s, he put out Adventist Currents, and then it sort of fizzled out when Bob moved and so on. But you can get it online, and it's full of articles. I've used quite a few in my books. And Doug's very interesting because he and I are really good friends.
Doug
Hackelman. Yeah.
Who wrote this
the book about the money? Yeah.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah, Who Watches Who Cares. Yeah. So he's been working for a long time. He's very thorough. He's got up to Glacier View. But he sent me the manuscript. I'd say it's about 2012. I'm not sure of the date, but it's a long time ago. And he'd written about 37 chapters, and he got up to Glacier View. And when I read that book, which one day will come out, he's finished the first volume. He puts down all the people who question the investigative judgment. And it was an eye-opener to me, because I thought, Des is just the latest person who's done this. Because we know about Ken Wright, but people like him were very much bad pressed, like Des has been. You know.
Yes.
So we always think of them negatively. But there were a lot of them, and he goes through all this history. And my eyes opened wide, and I thought, Des is just the latest person to speak about it.
And I think the only difference, I would say, is that Des is the latest, and for anyone that has eyes to see and ears to hear needs to realize that he is the latest and the last, because it is so evident that the last, 181 years now since 1844, the fact is, as you said, I'm so glad you said it, I've never thought of it this way before, the message that you and Des preached is only ever undermined if it is seen through the lens of Adventism. He was trying to correct the Adventist view that undermines the gospel. And I think what I hope people realize is that Adventism is always going to undermine the gospel. I hope that there is not another Des, because there will just be sadness that follows, because they will realize that that Adventism undermines the gospel. And I feel for all this list of people that you mentioned that Doug Hackelman writes about, because Adventism has this weird loop that seems to happen every 20, 30 years, 40 years, where it's almost as if people are oblivious to the fact that this beautiful growth of the gospel comes up again through someone like Des and yourself and is undermined. But they don't realize that the Adventism itself does the undermining. And so here we are 40 years after the last chance, and I don't see another Des Ford coming.
Well,
the loop seems to be broken for the first time.
We can't limit God. I've sort of done all this work, and I can tell you, you've got no idea how much work it is. I've done 9 of these books since 2023. I'd republished 3 of Des's books before that, before I started these 9. They are, I had them behind me, but I've moved them. They are 12 inches wide. They're packed with stuff. But I've also, as well as the 3 before I did the 9, I've also republished 6 of Des's books: his Black Daniel, his Revelation Commentary, Crisis, and I've changed them into Deliverance and Restoration, D&R. And I've got a lion on one cover and a lamb on the Revelation one. So I've done them as a set. And I've also redone Daniel and the Coming King, which Des wrote later from GNU, because he had things that could not have been published when the Black Daniel was published.
Yeah.
And probably hadn't completely developed his thoughts. I told you that the writing of Crisis in 1970, was it 8 or 9? 9, because that was the year everything happened. He was writing that, and then the Righteousness by Faith meetings, that also kept putting stuff into the barrel, because he came back from the Library of Congress and those Righteousness by Faith meetings, and I couldn't find a date for that. But fortunately, I got a parcel of letters, and in the letters, it's mainly my letters writing to Heinz Susenbach. I mentioned Des has gone to these Righteousness by Faith meetings. I've been able to put some of these dates together from correspondence. So there was a timing to it. It wasn't planned.
Yeah. No.
You know, the reaction to the forum meeting, Des was a bit worried about it. Fred Veltman didn't want him to do it. Wayne Judd and Adrian Zukoski said, you'll be fine. Forum does things like this. Cottrell had taken a meeting the week before and a week after at Lane, Melinda and Andrews. Nobody turned a hair. But see, they were after Des, and once he spoke on the investigative judgment, they had him. That's what happened. You've got to see the whole history of what happened.
Yeah. And again, as you said, he needed to raise that topic about the IJ, because it undermines the gospel. Like that, what you've said today has just hit me like in a good way, like a Mack truck. Yeah. But
Des was having people. Yeah. He's doing these meetings three times a week. That's when they cut his meetings down at PUC. He was never home. It was me and Luke.
Yeah.
Des was off around the country. He'd get to the airport with his tickets. He didn't even know where he was going. Now, the brethren, the CBs, knew where he was going, because somebody at PUC sent out his meeting list, and when he got there, it had been plastered with Dr. Ford's dangerous doctrine. So there was a great... This is what people don't know. There's a networking of the right wing, very organised. See, liberals can't organise a party, really. Well, they might do a party. I mean, you could organise a party, but it's part of being an abstract person that they're not big on detail.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
right wing, they're very good at it. And Des, you know, as he said when they talked about him going to, and that was a very serious thing. We were going to Britain. It was talked about at Glacier View. But once it got to the second Prexad meeting, which I wasn't, they had 3 meetings before they actually fired Des. And they didn't invite me because I might have cried. Nearly washed them all away. They said they stacked the committee. I don't know whether it was the second one or the last one after Glacier View, but they stacked Herbert Douglas was on, White, Kenneth Woods. They stacked it, and they said Des is too much of a heretic to go anywhere. So the ideas for us going to the new gallery in England was scotched. You see, a lot of people don't know that. They were trying to save, Duncan even was trying to save Des. It was talked about on the floor.
Yeah.
I've got to try and remember where I'm going because I've got a purpose in what I say, but on the way I often fall off the log. So what were we talking about?
They were trying to scuttle his preaching and traveling and
yeah, because it was all organized. You've got the right wing, the CBs, and nobody knows what was like for Des. Oh, I know what I was talking about. That conversation where they're talking about him going to the new gallery, and Des said to them, look, they will find me wherever I go. He said, I go to a camp meeting, every tent has been, they put in Dr. Ford's Dangerous Doctrines. Now, that's written by George Burnside in Australia, financed by Raglan Marx.
Yes.
They put a lot of money into it.
A lot of money.
It's spread around. That Des's mailing list has been sent out. He doesn't know where he's going. I don't know where he is.
But they
don't know where he's going, but they know. Probably either Irwin Gain or the secretary was very right wing.
They were organised,
they were organised,
networked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
And I guess that's my lament for the Liberal guys. And I used to hold hope that they would one day grasp the notion that they have something special and get organised. And I've had chats like even, you know, in the last 2 years with guys that are, I've said stuff like this before, but they're high up at the GC, not the SPD, and they have chatted to me and we're doing stuff and we're organising stuff and we're creating a network, and don't you worry, this gospel of righteous by faith will shine. And you know, I chat to them 2 years later. How's it going? Is that still on? Oh no, and whatever reason, they just haven't grasped this notion of getting
one thing I wanted to say to you was there was a state when you had people like Graham Bradford who did a huge lot of work about Ellen White and all this and took seminars and preached the gospel. I mean, John Carter and Graham, they don't know we knew this, but they spoke strongly against Des after Glacier View. But when they came to our house later, they were very advanced in the cause, and as funny as a fight. And they said it took us 15 years to catch up.
Yeah.
See, and then there was an attempt to change things, but see, that generation is dying off.
Yeah.
And you've got people like Larry Christoffel, who was like Cottrell, who went and listened to all the Glacier View tapes.
Yeah.
And he did shorthand, took notes on it and everything. But basically, Adventism never knew the gospel. And one of the problems is, well, that's half the problem. But another thing to take into account, and I'm working on this at the moment because I'm writing an article, because my books may be featured in Spectrum. Won't be for a while. But anyway, I'm writing an overall article, and I'm doing it in sections. And the last section goes through what Des's position was on the gospel, what the traditional view was. And I got that one day in a phone call with Bob Brinsmead, who still knows all the old stuff. He's gone from very traditional Adventism, perfectionism, to righteousness by faith. Then he went to more liberal, very liberal. And now he's sort of out. Because when you start saying that Jesus only said the Sermon on the Mount and a few aphorisms and a few parables. You've really made him into a man, no divinity. He's just one of the prophets. That's what the Church of England, the Liberals, used to say. So this is what I call going down the gurgler.
Yeah.
You know, Des stayed in the middle, or well, he stayed gospel, put it that way. But when you talk about progressives, this is one of the issues. This is a wide range of people, and a lot of the progressives don't agree with Des. You've got the moral influence, Christus Victor. If you read Wikipedia on the atonement theories, they will give you a picture. Now, moral influence inside Adventism is apparently not quite the same. I'm parroting Des there. But they're against the idea of sacrifice. They don't like blood. They're vegetarians, of course, so they don't like blood. And so Graham Maxwell and Jack Provencher at Loma Linda for decades taught all the professionals, the dentists and the doctors, whose big, they deal with issues of what you call theodicy. Why does God allow suffering? It's a very hard job to do. And moral influence appeals to people who think like that. So that's a huge segment in the church, and all these groups, the perfectionists, they've perfected their arguments over the last 45 years. And the liberal progressives who don't believe what Des did, they've perfected their arguments, and there's a lot of them. Yeah, so I sort of feel like you do. And Des came, and he came bringing good gifts. He wanted to help the church to become more liberal. He was a great supporter of Ellen White because he knew her so well, and she was different to the pioneer. She had faults. We won't go into that. She definitely had faults, and some of the stuff that she wrote to people was terrible. That's kept at Andrews. But that she had something, and see, Des knew her backwards. And anyway, I'm rattling off now. But the church, just like Jesus, they refused what Des had to bring, and they accused him of all sorts of stuff that he wasn't guilty of. They thought he was sneaky like they were.
Yeah. No, they've missed their chance. My thought is that for many decades, over every 30 to 40 years, they've had an opportunity, and every time they've failed to run with it, and this was their last chance. And so every now and again, you still see the 10-yearly cycle. I see the 10-year cycle where there's an infusion of love and Jesus and the gospel, and it comes up with the One Project, and prior to that, there was what we were doing here in North New South Wales Conference in Australia, and you just get excited and you think something's going to happen, but it doesn't get to the level of the 30 to 40 year opportunity, which is not happening. We're 45 years now past Glacier View. There's been no sign. There's been the 10 years every, the tree hugging Jesus is a hippie. Let's be the One Project, or let's follow Jesus only. That keeps happening, and with worship and this sort of thing. But that was usually followed every 30 to 40 years with a bigger spike. That has not happened this time around. And that just confirms my prediction that it's over. And so those who have got their nice little version of liberal progressive Adventism and Des Ford theology and these others, that's nice. But the reality is, in my humble opinion, is that it is not accurately assessing what you and Des were teaching, and it's not going to get legs. And it's a sad thing, because there's so many greats, like we're listening, Norm was listing Arthur Patrick and Cottrell and all these incredible minds, but
well, one of the ways that I always think, I've done all this work, and I can assure you it's a massive
incredible.
amount of work.
Yeah.
And I've done it really by faith as a fleece. And I thought, well, if God uses it, he does, and if he doesn't, he doesn't.
Yeah.
But I'm giving them a chance.
Well, I think now that the opportunity is now gone for Adventists to fully embrace the gospel. I'm saying some big bold stuff here, but the opportunity for them to grasp the view of the gospel that you and Des had hasn't stopped. You've put the fleece out there. Someone will come along, and someone will run with it and grasp it. And it might be 100 years from now, they might be watching this video back, saying, "Hey, that's the video that got us inspired to do this thing." So I think it's admirable that you've done that, because you're not only are you doing the Glacier View stuff, you're re-releasing his books so people can access those, and I think grasp a really great, I hate to say the word version, but a great understanding of the gospel via what you and he taught. And I hope that people do.
The way it happened, I had somebody in America who begged me to write a biography of Des. Well, the problem was I stayed home and Des was gone, and a lot of the good stuff, I wasn't there. So, and Milton did an amazing job. When I republished it in 2023, because it was out of print, I was amazed. There were a few details about the family that weren't quite right, and I talked to him, we changed it. So I republished that, but it was a genius thing. Now, the church taught Milton down, but look, he's amazing, and he's
incredible.
He's helped me. I mean, he's sick of Glacier View because he's like you. He doesn't think there's a lot of hope, and I'm the Energizer Bunny. But he's basically okayed everything I've done, because I want to make sure that he agreed that I was putting it right and all that sort of stuff. So he's been a wonderful help. John Rosie has been a marvelous help.
Incredible.
But see, the thing that happened that got me doing this was when they got Rosalie Power put out. And I never said anything to Rose at the time, because I thought she was a friend. She'd always been very good to us. She'd asked us for Des's collection. We'd put it in the will. And because of the memorial, I had asked Laurie Evans, do you think they want this collection? Because
you could do
Loma Linda and PUC and Andrews would have wanted it as well. But in the end, they were interested. And Loma Linda said, we've got the budget, but they didn't pursue it. So I thought, it could get lost at sea. It's a lot of money. So I thought, we'll go with it. But what we decided to do was do two contracts, legal contracts, one with the division, one with Rosalie, who was to take care of it, decide who was to take it over.
Right.
So we're doing that, and it was all done very quietly. It went down to there, and
wow.
They got cataloguing and everything. And then, of course, behind the scenes, they bring somebody else in over Rosalie, and they only give her 12 hours a week. She couldn't live on it. So she decided to leave, and I didn't say anything to her until I'd finished volume 5. And then I wrote to her and I said, I said, look, you're the reason I wrote these books, because I didn't know what to do. I couldn't take the collection back. I'd have had to pay them back the travel expenses. Some of it I paid for, but they did. And I thought I got nowhere to put it all. So I thought, all my life, I'd put together probably over 30 books for Des. I'm a trained typesetter. I'll get all these documents, which fortunately I'd scanned. I spent about 18 months doing it. I thought, I'll put these in books. So I started doing it, and I probably said this before. I did 2 volumes, thought I was finished, and then another box of documents turns up that's been hidden for 12 years. I mentioned that. So off I go again, and the letters come in every few months, about 40 letters. So I kept having letters. The only problem is it sort of went backwards because they were scanned in the opposite date. But nevertheless, I did what I could. And then people kept sending me stuff. I would stop and think I was finished. People would, like John Den sent me a great article, which he'd written for Spectrum. They wouldn't touch it. They're not really interested in the gospel, and neither is Adventist Today. They do a lot of good, but they're more liberal, see? Right. So they're not interested in what Des taught.
Yeah.
So off I went. I ended up doing 9 of them.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you say, you're putting a lease out there, a fleece, I should say, a fleece, and in some ways, SDAQ&A, whenever we do anything on the Fords, we're also putting that information out there, not for really any benefit to us, but other than to have it there for future generations to unpack and see with fresh eyes. Now, I have to wrap it up there. I want to
Yeah,
thank you
that's all
so
right.
much for the providential last-minute ability for you to come on the show today. And I think
Because you put up that comment
yeah,
about
I
Norma.
know.
Norma didn't initiate anything
No,
and
and
always regretted.
it
But
was,
see, we never felt badly about that because,
yeah.
as Des said, better he did it than anybody else.
Yeah. And he talks about it. If you get a chance, go 2.5 hours in roughly and watch till you join again. He covered the core fascinating stuff. And I don't think I've seen it for 5 years. So it was really interesting. Next week, I think it's Ross Cole is the one in the that we'll be replaying. I will be trying to contact him. I contact everyone that I've interviewed and say, hey, I'm replaying your interview. Would you like to come and watch it with me and add a commentary to it? So it'll be interesting to see if he can or not. I'm just plowing on. It's just the same time every week. I'm just going to release them. John Rosier, I think, is after that, and I'll be chatting to him to see if I can get him to do it. We'll do it later in the afternoon because it's 1 a.m. otherwise for him. So that should be coming up hopefully next week as well. And then there's others coming up with you again down the track. So I'll be inviting you back on. And when you've finished volume 9, are you going to do a volume 10? Is there one more after that?
Well, only if they come after me.
Well, I think
I've been very nice. As Bob Wolfgram, he's read 5. And he said, I like the spirit of redemption, the hope for redemption. And that's the way they're written. So there's lots of stuff I know about people that I haven't put in. And the only thing that might tempt me was if they came after me. And people laugh at me, but, I know the brethren. I know what they do or can do.
And they're very good at coming after you without you even realizing it, I've discovered. Now, just
they're better off to just,
oh, let
it alone, because so many people are going to read them.
You mentioned, and of course, all your volumes are available on Amazon. If you just look up Gillian Ford and Glacier View, up they come. They're available
and
there.
And Desmond Ford for Des's books.
For Des's books, yes. So they're all on Amazon.
Yeah, I was telling you about Doug.
As well. Yes, I just wanted to give Doug's book a quick plug because a very good friend of ours donated about 20 copies of this for me to give away or sell very cheaply. If you contact SDAQ&A@gmail.com, and it's and with the letters, so SDAQANDA@gmail.com. If you email Adrian there, we will, the special, if you say it's the season 13 special, if you just pay the postage plus $5, it's yours, and it's a fantastic book. And the reason I've done that is because it costs about $30 to get to USA.
I know you've got to go, but just to finish on Doug, he's working away on the series on Cottrell, which will be dynamite when it comes out.
Do you think he will finish it?
Well, the first one is done. But anyway, for 45 years, the scholarly community has pretty much ignored Doug. Very, very gifted man. But not in the stream, in the scholarly stream. And all out of the blue, Alex Carpenter suddenly asked him to write for Spectrum after all this time.
Wow.
And so Doug came back, and Alex Carpenter wanted somebody to review my books. And I tried it 2 different ways, and I said to him, look, I'm just not comfortable about it. So I pulled out. And then Doug said to me, he said, I'm going to ask Alex if I can review your books. And he said, you'll never get the appreciation for it if you deserve it. So I just, I thought, oh, well, if he does it, he'll be kind to me. I mean, he's very liberal. But see, that's not the problem. You can live together. I don't care what anybody thinks, but you've got a right to your own viewpoint. So he and I really get on well.
Yeah.
And
Well, say
he
hi
likes
from me.
he likes my books because there's all these documents and they're
that you can
organized.
use.
And not only have I done the 9 volumes, but
You've
I've done a 52-page index
index as
of
well.
all the volumes, so you can look up
Nice
the
and
name
easily. Yeah.
and find stuff, because I don't know where stuff is now.
Well, look, say a big hi to him for me. He is interview number 42. So tell him that in 42 weeks' time, I'll be asking him on the show to do a commentary on his interview, promote his book, and he might have that as a goal to finish his Cottrell thing. He's got 42 weeks, tell him.
Yeah, he'd be happy about that.
Maybe it might be less than that, because sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 in 1 week as well. But look, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Gillian Ford, my very special guest, surprise guest today. Great to have had you on the program, and I highly recommend go and buy these books. I'll just randomly grab one off my shelf. I've got, I think, even number 9.
It's number 2.
I've got the pre-release number 9 one floating around, I think. This is number 2, yeah. And all available on Amazon. And if you just look up on the way to Glacier View, you'll see them all there. And they're just packed with letters, articles. It's just fascinating reading. That is for
You
sure.
know, it's possible to just buy one book.
Yes, you don't have to buy the whole lot. Yeah.
Uh,
So go and buy a copy.
They all tell the same story, but different things. It's what you call overkill.
No, it's not. It's
The
underkill.
trouble was I kept learning more stuff.
Yeah, I wanted.
Learning more stuff.
I want 10 volumes. I said that to you even when you went to number 3 or 4. Now, if you'd
9
like
testimonies. 9 testimonies.
9
Somebody said to me.
and thank you those who are supporting what I do here. Just send a couple of dollars if you've got spare. And don't forget, if you'd like to be a sponsor of next week's program with Ross Cole, if you're listening to this currently and not way in the future, contact me, because it's really good value. You can promote your book, your link, website, business, or just put your name there that you want to have associated with a particular episode. So get in touch with me soon for that, because that's I'll be working on that tomorrow.
Just one more thing. It'll be brief. But I did 7 volumes, and I thought, well, DAQ&A, the series after Glacier View, they did 7 volumes. That's enough. And then Ted Wilson announced that there was going to be an 8th.
Uh-oh.
Mm.
Hey, just remind me, that just popped into my brain, that, and I think Des was on the committee. What was the committee again that they tried to just find the sanctuary IJ from the Bible alone? They were commissioned. They were together for 5 years-ish, and then they couldn't do it, and so they disbanded, and there's no minutes.
Oh, no, Des wasn't there. That was in the 1960s.
Right.
The person who ran that was the Englishman, I know him very well, who wrote the letter to Hamill that says Des has not written anything in the Glacier View manuscript that we didn't cover in the 1960s. Cottrell was on that committee, and they decided not to put out any minutes.
And what did they call that meeting? Just for me to reference, because I want to do a whole show.
Well, it was the Sanctuary Committee, the 1960s Sanctuary Committee, whether it had another name.
Right.
Okay,
I can Google something. And if people watching or listening, let me know, because I want to do a whole show on that, because it fascinates me.
It was all
they couldn't find any biblical Bible alone. They couldn't do it.
Harry, what was his name? Harry. He was British. He was the ministerial secretary in the North American division, and he was at St. Helena in the old folks' home when we were at PUC. So we visited with him, very much behind Des, and basically wrote to Hamill and said, Des has brought out nothing that we didn't cover in the 1960s. So this is what you get from Doug Hackelman's books, where he goes over where people brought this up. Des was just the latest in the row.
Well, ask Doug if he wouldn't mind doing another interview with me soon, and we'll talk about that topic, and we'll talk about that list of gospel people that have been trying to bring the gospel into Adventism for the last 180 years.
He's been asked to write a couple of things for Spectrum, and he's doing his book, and he's absolutely overwhelmed. So I don't know
he'll
if
be
he'll
busy.
do it.
But just remind him that it's just he just sits down, has a coffee, chats to me for 2 hours. There's no preparation. It's just over lunch. We'll have a coffee. He'll have a lot of people think they've got to prepare. He'll have enough info in his brain just to have a conversation.
Right.
Anyway,
Okay.
I will run.
Well, we had an interesting chat.
It's been a great day. We've hit 5:36.
Glad to make you happy.
5:36 minutes. I don't know if that's beating the Bob.
That's shocking. At least I wasn't here most of it. You can't blame me.
Bob Brinsmead might be. I'll go and check what his number is. I think Matthew Cortman's got the record at 6 hours. I'll just check that too. Anyway, thank you, Gillian. Have a good evening. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Bye, everybody.
If there's anyone that's watched the whole 5 hours and 37 minutes, let me know. I'm impressed.
They're still writing.
Yes, still writing. Thank you, everybody.
They're not listening to us, they're writing to each other.
And I look forward to catching everyone tomorrow.
They're getting hungry. Enjoy the haystacks. Where's the bacon?
Where's the bacon?
This is hilarious.
Oh, there's some great conversations going on there. And see everybody tomorrow for our Good News Fellowship gathering. Frank Merendino is speaking tomorrow on Paul and Romans. So it's going to be a good one. See you, Gillian. It's been fantastic. Catch you.
Au revoir.
See you when I see you.
See ya. Bye.